Hello, welcome to Ben Talks. I'm Ben, and happy NFL Draft Eve to all who celebrate. Hope you're looking forward to the NFL Draft as much as I am. But in the lead up to the draft, I've been thinking, what if every NFL team were to draft a team of Pokémon? And so that's what I have for you here today, is a Pokémon team for all 32 NFL teams. Now, you're probably looking at the link to this video down below you and saying, this is a really long video from a guy who's never made a video like this before. And you're right. So I made sure to include chapters for every single team so you can jump to just your NFL team. You don't have to wait around and watch every other team in the hopes that your team's next. So feel free to jump around, skip around to your team or your teams, whatever teams you're most interested in, and then you don't have to watch the whole thing. But I would appreciate anybody who does watch the whole thing. I know I like a good long YouTube video essay as background noise, so hopefully this serves well for some of you out there as well. And also, I just quickly want to give a huge shout out to a couple of my friends who helped me out with this. In particular, my buddy Spencer, who really helped me break through when I hit a wall on assigning Pokemon to the NFL teams. But with all that preamble out of the way, let's go ahead and take a look at every NFL team's Pokemon team. Okay, so first things first, got some ground rules to go over. I had to set myself some guidelines in how I approached this project, how I would give every NFL team their team of Pokemon. So let's go over the rules I set for myself. Rule number 1, no legendary or mythical Pokemon. So that would be like Mewtwo or Rayquaza, Jirachi, Mew, Arceus, Giratina. None of those Pokemon are permitted on any NFL team. Legendary and mythical Pokemon are banned. I am including Ultra Beasts as legendary Pokemon in this, but I am not including Paradox Pokemon as legendary Pokemon in this. So, for instance, the Ultra Beast Pokemon Nihilego or Buzzwole are barred. They are not permitted to be on any of these teams. But Paradox Pokemon like Sandy Shocks or Iron Hands are allowed on these teams. Now, an exception to the Paradox Pokemon being allowed would be Paradox Pokemon that are based off of legendary Pokemon. So there are Paradox Pokemon for the legendary beasts, which are Walking Wake, Gouging Fire, Raging Bolt. And there are Paradox Pokemon based off of the Swords of Justice, which are Iron Leaves, Iron Boulder, and Iron Crown. So those 6 Pokemon are Paradox Pokemon that are based on legendaries. They are not permitted on any of these teams. But otherwise, Paradox Pokemon are permitted. Ultra Beasts are not permitted. Rule number 2, no repeats. That means that if a Pokemon appears on one team, it cannot appear on another team. So let's say, for instance, I put Charizard on, the New England Patriots. Spoiler alert, I do put Charizard on the New England Patriots. But no repeats, right? So if Charizard's on the Patriots, Charizard cannot appear on any other NFL team. Now, split evolutions might appear on different teams. So, for instance, if one team has Vileplume, another team can still use Bellossom, but you can't have both teams using Vileplume. Now, that brings us to different forms of the same Pokemon. So sometimes you have multiple forms of one Pokemon. For instance, your regional variants, your Alola forms, your Hisui forms, your Galar forms, etc. And other various alternate forms for Pokemon. Alternate forms for the same Pokemon are eligible to be on multiple teams if they have different typings. So, for instance, if one team has an Alolan Executor, another team can have the original Executor, the base Executor, because they have different typings. Alolan Executor is Grass and Dragon type, but normal Executor is Grass and Psychic type. So because they have different typings, both are eligible. However, if you have a Pokemon that has multiple forms, but those different forms have the same typing, they are not eligible to be repeated. So let's use the Pokemon Lycanroc, for example. Lycanroc is a pure rock type, and it doesn't matter which form it's in. It can be in midday form, midnight form, or dusk form. All three are pure rock type, which means that I could only put one Lycanroc on one NFL team. I can't use different forms of Lycanroc on different teams. Hopefully that makes sense. Rule number 3, I have to give every NFL team a full team of 6 Pokemon. So, in the Pokemon games, right, you could only have 6 Pokemon on you at a time, and that is the number. So every NFL team has to have a full team of 6 Pokemon, no more, no less. Rule number 4, I'm going to limit duplicate typings on teams. The idea being, right, that I want these teams to feel like Pokemon teams that if you were playing through the game, someone might conceivably be willing to use this team in a playthrough. Because in a playthrough of Pokemon, you want to have diverse typings on your team. You don't want to have too many duplicate typings on your team. So I am going to limit duplicate typings as much as possible. That said, there are going to be some duplicate typings on some teams, but that's really in occasions where it makes sense to me and still sort of feels like the team composition as a whole is viable and reasonable, right? So there will be some duplicate typings, but I'm really trying to limit the amount of duplicate typings that occur. Now, on a related note, trying to make NFL Pokemon teams that feel like you might actually want to use them in a playthrough of a Pokemon game, fully evolved Pokemon are strongly preferred, right? Really trying to stick to fully evolved Pokemon. However, if there's an earlier evolution in a Pokemon line that fits the team better and is at least somewhat viable in a Pokemon game playthrough, then in that case, I will do that. I think I only do that once in this entire thing, but earlier evolutions are permitted if it fits better, otherwise really preferring fully evolved Pokemon. So, again, as an example of that, right, a lot of the trade evolution Pokemon, the pre-evolved form, while not as good as the final form, is still viable to use in the playthrough in case you didn't have somebody to trade with. So, you could still get through Pokemon Fire Red with a Kadabra, even though an Alakazam would be better, right? You could still get through with a Kadabra. And finally, the last rule, arguably the most important rule in this whole thing, is I have to provide one or more reasons why I put a Pokemon on a given NFL team. Why did I put that Pokemon on that team? And the reason could be anything related to the team, to the team's history, to its players, past or present. Could be related to the city where the team plays or the region where the team plays. But there has to be a reason, or more than one reason, why a given Pokemon is on a given NFL team. Some of these are definitely a stretch. There are definitely Pokemon here that are a stretch, but I do provide a reason for each one. Like I said, there are definitely some stretches. I had to place 192 Pokemon to give every NFL team 6 Pokemon. So, did my best. Let me know which one of these are too much of a stretch for you and what you'd replace them with in the comments as I go through this. So, with all of that, with all that preamble, with all those rules out of the way, let's start looking at some of the teams themselves. And let's start with my NFL team, the Buffalo Bills. So, Buffalo Bills team of 6 Pokemon, we're gonna start with Bouffalante. This one is pretty self-explanatory, right? Bouffalante is the Buffalo Pokemon. Also, though, a nice little bit of synergy with it being the Buffalo Pokemon for the Buffalo Bills is that Bouffalant actually learns a lot of recoil moves, and it has the ability Reckless, which powers up recoil moves. That kind of reminds me of Josh Allen's very brash rushing style, how he'll sort of run through defenders, right? Take some recoil damage along the way, potentially. Pokemon number 2 is Avalugg. Avalugg here. Avalugg is based on a glacier, basically. It's a living glacier. By the way, Bouffalant is a normal type. For those of you who don't know, Avalugg is an ice type. Buffalo obviously gets a lot of snow, so having an ice Pokemon seemed appropriate. Also, glaciers did used to cover all of western New York, so again, the glacier Pokemon makes a lot of sense here. And also, as an added little bonus, right, Avalugg is a very bulky Ice-type Pokemon. Well, one of the Buffalo Bills' offensive linemen, Dion Dawkins, has the nickname Snowman, and so is bulky, right? And so Avalugg is sort of a bulky ice type to line up with Dion Dawkins as the Snowman. So there's also a nice little added element there. Third Pokemon on the Bills is Honchkrow. Honchkrow here is sort of a Mafia Dawn Pokemon. And of course, Bills fans are the Bills Mafia. So it only made sense to have the Mafia Dawn Pokemon here. Pokemon number 4 is Blaziken. Blaziken is a fighting chicken Pokemon, of course. And Buffalo's famous food are buffalo chicken wings. Blaziken's fire fighting type. Honchkrow, by the way, I forgot to mention, is dark flying type. Now, Blaziken, buffalo wings are made with buffalo sauce, and buffalo sauce is primarily made with hot sauce. Blaziken as a fire type, also hot, so kind of works. And also, Blaziken's red is obviously not a precise match for the red, the buffalo red, but yeah, it's close enough, right? Next up is Nidoking. Nidoking is a poison and ground type. Now, Nidoking is Pokemon number 34. And this works well as a reference to legendary Buffalo Bill Thurman Thomas, who wore number 34. That number is retired with Buffalo Bills. Now, here's the interesting thing, right? Thurman Thomas, legendary running back. Nidoking is the primary Pokemon that is used in Generation 1 speed running. So there's that nice running connection there, as well as being the appropriate number to represent Thurman Thomas. So that seemed like a good fit for this team. And finally, on the Buffalo Bills is Blastoise. I really wanted to get a water type on the Bills. Buffalo is right on Lake Erie, and so there's a lot of water in the area there, right? And of course, freshwater turtles call the region home. There's many freshwater turtles that call the region home. Blastoise is primarily blue, which again sort of fits the Bills having blue. It's again not the same blue, but it's close enough. And Blastoise has cannons coming out of his shell. Well, the Bills' 2 best and most famous quarterbacks were Jim Kelly and Josh Allen, who were both known to have cannon arms. So that is the lineup for the Buffalo Bills: Bouffalant, Avalugg, Honchkrow, Blaziken, Nidoking, and Blastoise. Moving on to division rivals, Miami Dolphins. First Pokemon for the Miami Dolphins was really easy for me to place, and it is Palafin. Palafin is the Dolphin Pokemon, right? Even in Palafin's base form, he's kind of got the right light blue coloration. Palafin is, of course, a water type. Bright light blue coloration is base form. Now you see 2 pictures here for Palafin, and that's because Palafin's ability causes it to transform between these 2 forms when it switches out of battle. regardless, right, this is the Dolphin Pokemon for the Dolphins. Just makes too much sense. Pokemon number 2 for the Dolphins is the Fire Ghost type Skeledirge. So, Florida is famously home to large numbers of alligators. Now, Skeledirge is technically based off of a crocodile, but there aren't enough just alligator Pokemon for all the Florida teams, and I did want to make sure that all the Florida teams had an alligator or crocodile Pokemon. So Skeledirge ends up on the Miami Dolphins, and part of the reason I decided to go with Skeledirge for the Dolphins is related to the region that Skeledirge comes from. So Skeledirge comes from the Paldea region. Now the Paldea region is based on Spain. Spain, of course, infamously colonized most of Latin America, and that is why so many Hispanic and Latino people speak Spanish, right? Florida as a whole is home to a very large Hispanic population, but Miami is especially home to a large Hispanic population. So I decided then to put Skeledirge because of that sort of Spanish connection for Miami as opposed to one of the other 2 Florida teams. Next up for the Miami Dolphins is Alolan Executor, grass and dragon type. So Alolan Executor is here because Florida is the palm tree capital of the United States. So they claim anyway. And of the cities in Florida, Miami has more palm trees than any other city in Florida. And so the Dolphins got Alolan Executor. Next up is Flamigo. And I'm realizing there's a lot of Paldean Pokemon on the Dolphins. But next up is Flamigo. Flamigo is a flying fighting type. Now, the American Flamingo used to live in great numbers in the southernmost part of Florida. They don't really have that high a population anymore, but they are still very much a cultural icon of the state of Florida, and especially because the Flamingo was really more common in the southern part of the state, I'm giving Flamigo to Miami. Next up, we have Mousehold, normal type Pokemon. Mousehold is definitely a little bit of a journey to get to why I put it here, so please bear with me. But I was really trying to find a Pokemon that could stand in for the 1972 Miami Dolphins, the only team in the history of the NFL to post a perfect season. Never lost a single game, won the Super Bowl, an incredible accomplishment. But I was having a hard time finding a Pokemon that fit. I sort of looked at the national decks first. 72 didn't really fit there, didn't really fit in the various other regional Pokédexes either. Either they were unevolved, or it was a repeated type, or the vibes just didn't quite fit. And Mousehold is number 72 in the Paldea Pokédex. And I did initially dismiss Mousehold as well. Just didn't think it fit. And I was, a little disappointed that I wasn't able to find a good Pokemon to represent the 1972 Miami Dolphins. But as I was looking at Mousehold a little bit more, it actually weirdly started to fit for me here. Mousehold, I would say, is a pretty overlooked Pokemon. It's not a Pokemon that gets a ton of attention. And this was true of the members of the 72 Dolphins, right? A lot of the members of that team did get pretty overlooked. Tom Landry at the time dubbed their defense the no-name defense because of the lack of high-profile players. The Dolphins quarterback, Bob Grease, was injured in week 5 of the season, and so backup Earl Morale ended up playing the rest of the regular season and part of the postseason on this, perfect season, right? So a lot of the key elements of the 72 Dolphins were sort of overlooked at the time, much as Mousehold is sort of overlooked. But despite the 72 Dolphins, individual members being overlooked, they are one of, if not the greatest NFL team ever. They did something that no other NFL team has ever done. And so they, definitely deserve respect for that. Mousehold does not have the same record as the 72 Dolphins do, but Mousehold is a much better Pokemon than you would think at first glance. It's got some pretty good moves, particularly pretty good multi-hit moves, and it's been at least somewhat viable in several recent competitive Pokemon video game championship seasons. It's even been on a few teams that have won, regionals in the last couple of years. Now, this is not the same as having an undefeated season and going to the Super Bowl, but still respectable showing for a Pokemon that's often overlooked. And so, to me, this seemed to be the best number 72 Pokemon to represent the 72 Dolphins. Last Pokemon on the Dolphins is the Rock and Psychic type Solrock. So Solrock is here to reference Hard Rock Stadium's notorious home field advantage. I feel like it's actually a home field advantage that doesn't get talked about really as much as it should. So, obviously it gets very hot and humid and sunny in Miami, particularly early in the season. Dolphins, they don't play in a dome. They don't play in an indoor stadium. It's an open stadium. It's open to the heat. It's open to the humidity. It's open to the sun. Well, here's the thing the Dolphins do. The Dolphins have their sideline on the side of the field that's in the shade in the early afternoon, forcing the away team to sit on the sideline that faces direct sunlight in the early afternoon. That's, of course, the time of day that most NFL games that they are playing, your 1 o'clock Sunday games, are taking place at. So this is actually a really good home field advantage for the Dolphins. And, also, the home team picks colors first, right? And so the Dolphins usually choose to play in their white jerseys at home, jerseys that don't absorb as much sunlight. Again, forcing the away team to wear their darker color jerseys in the already hot and humid stadium. Again, a really strong home field advantage. It's all related back to the sun. Solrock is, of course, a sun-based Pokemon, so it's a perfect fit for the Dolphins. Moving on to the New England Patriots, and I already gave you a spoiler about one of the Pokemon on this team. It's Charizard. So, Charizard's here for a very simple reason. Charizard is Pokemon number 6. The Patriots have won 6 Super Bowls, and all of them in my lifetime. Also, as an added bonus, right, Charizard has, of course, been shown a lot of favoritism by the Pokemon Company. And during the Patriots dynasty, they were often accused of receiving favoritism from the league, right? Yes, they were investigated for a couple of scandals, but I very much remember people, saying things like, "Oh, you can't even touch Tom Brady or you'll get a flag," which feels very much the same today as the way people talk about the Chiefs, right? As a side note, I've seen a lot of people online saying that nobody hated the Patriots dynasty as much as they hate the Chiefs dynasty today. The Chiefs dynasty are so much worse than the Patriots dynasty, and I'm calling bullshit. We hated the Patriots. We hated the Patriots so much. Everyone who wasn't a Patriots fan hated the Patriots during their dynasty. Just like pretty much everyone who's not a Chiefs fan hates the Chiefs today. I hate the Chiefs today. I'm a Buffalo Bills fan, right? You are just experiencing recency bias against the Chiefs. The Patriots dynasty sucked. We all hated it, and people hate the Chiefs just as much now as they hated the Patriots back then. There's not like a weird thing where it's like, oh, the Patriots were tolerable as a dynasty. No, they weren't. We hate dynasties. That's just the end of the day. Anyway, rant aside, moving on to the second Pokemon for the Patriots, we have Poltegeist, which is a ghost type. He's, of course, a little tea ghost, and he's here as a reference to the Boston Tea Party. Of course, during the American Revolution, Bostonians threw a bunch of British tea into the harbor, and just seemed like an appropriate reference to make for the New England Patriots. And also, kind of a fun little added thing, Poltegeist is a ghost-type Pokemon, so it kind of works as a reference to the Salem Witch Trials too, like another New England connection there, so that's fun. Next up is Crawdaunt. So, Crawdaunt is a water and dark type. New England is well known for its lobsters. Now, Crawdaunt is not actually a lobster Pokemon. It's actually based on a crawfish. But Crawdaunt sort of feels like it the most lobster-esque Pokemon option that fits on this team. So Crawdaunt is here to represent New England lobsters. Pokemon number 4 is Alolan Ninetales, Ice and Fairy type. Now, Alolan Ninetales is here because the Patriots play in Foxborough, and I wanted a fox-like Pokemon for their team. Now, I did originally consider Thievul, but I would have doubled up on the dark typing with Crawdaunt. Didn't want to do that. And also, Alolan Ninetales works well. Again, it's part ice type, and it gets really cold in New England during the winter months. So again, another nice little connection there. So Alolan Ninetales is here for Foxborough. Fifth Pokemon is Throh. Throh is a fighting type, and Throh is here because he kind of looks a little bit like Bill Belichick, to be completely honest. He's got a similar sort of build, has a similar kind of grumpy face, and one of Throh's abilities is called Inner Focus, which feels like it fits well with Belichick's, serious and focused demeanor as head coach of the Patriots. So Throh felt like an appropriate way to reference that dynasty. Obviously, Tom Brady would have been a good way to reference that dynasty. Couldn't really find a Pokemon that felt like it was a good reference to Tom Brady. Brady wore 12 all the time. Pokemon number 12 is Butterfree, which didn't really feel like it fit. So we got Throh here for Belichick instead. And Pokemon number 6 is Appleton. Appleton is a grass and dragon type. Appleton is here as a reference to Johnny Appleseed. Johnny Appleseed, which is a classic American folkloric hero, was from the Massachusetts Bay Colony. And so I wanted to pick one of our apple Pokemon, and, Applin, the base form, evolves into a couple of different options depending on the game, depending on what items you use. But I chose Appleton for New England because of the association of apple pie and America. Appleton is kind of like an apple pie, a little dragon guy. And so apple pie is a quintessentially like American dish. And that association seems to have first developed out of cookbooks and recipes from early New England. So Appleton is here. And finally, rounding out the AFC East, we have the New York Jets, or, the New Jersey Jets, which leads us to our first Pokemon, Kecleon. Kecleon is green, which is, the Jets' primary color. It's not the same green, but, it's still green. But the main reason Kecleon is here is because Kecleon has an ability called Camouflage, which does seem to be a good reference to the fact that despite the fact that they're called the New York Jets, they actually play in New Jersey. So again, camouflage, disguising itself as a New Yorker when it's actually from New Jersey. Second Pokemon on the Jets is Emboar. Emboar is a firefighting type Pokemon, and that's really important because of Fireman Ed, right? This part of Jets fan culture where Fireman Ed, he's in a firefighter hat, and he leads the Jets, Jets, Jets chant at games. So, Embor is here. Of the firefighting types, there's obviously several. I felt like Embor fit the Jets best. Seemed like the best way to reference Fireman Ed. It is, larger than the other firefighting types. The New York/New Jersey market is a larger media market than almost any other NFL team has. Also, at least when he first came out, I remember Embor not being a particularly popular Pokemon. And I feel like the Jets are notoriously badmouthed by everybody else. In fact, even by their own fans, they're frequently badmouthed. So that is why Embor is here. We have Unpheasant next. Male Unpheasant, female Unpheasant pictured here. Doesn't really matter which, you can pick which one you want. I would go male Unpheasant for the Jets though because of the green. And they're here because they're pigeons, right? New York City, famous for its pigeon population. So I wanted to give Unpheasant to one of the New York teams and ended up landing on the Jets. Next up is Muck, poison type Pokemon here. Muck is here as a reference to the pollution in the East and Hudson rivers. East and Hudson sort of are infamous for the pollution in them. There have been pretty significant cleanup projects in the East River, in the Hudson River, but that sort of a reputation of being dirty, that reputation of water pollution has kind of stuck for the East and Hudson. And so Muck kind of made sense because Muck is a Pokemon that's frequently associated with water pollution. In a couple of the games, in the Kanto games, also in Black 2, White 2, when you can go down into the sewers beneath Castelia, you can actually find Grimer, Muck's pre-evolution, while surfing. So it does seem like Muck is kind of the water pollution Pokemon, so Muck made sense for New York. And fifth, Sharpedo. The Jets need a water type. They're really close to several major bodies of water, and Sharpedo was chosen as the representative water type for the team as a reference to the musical West Side Story. West Side Story is set in New York, and in that musical, there are two gangs. And the gangs are called the Jets and the Sharks. So, the Jets have the Shark Pokemon. So there we go. Water Dark type. I don't know if I already mentioned that, but Sharpedo's Water Dark. And finally, bringing up the rear is the Grass type Lilligant. So MetLife Stadium, which is where both the Jets and the Giants play, is part of the Meadowlands Sports Complex. And so I wanted a Pokemon that sort of had kind of a flower association to sort of reference the Meadowlands. Lilligant has got several Pokédex entries that mention the care that it puts into making its head flower bloom. So that felt like a really good fit for a place called the Meadowlands. And also, multiple Pokédex entries mention how celebrities really seem to like Lilligant. I felt like this was a good connection to the sort of ubiquity that the Jets seem to have in pop culture. They're in a lot of TV shows, they're referenced in a lot of TV shows and movies. And they seem to be referenced in TV shows and movies more than the Giants. So it made sense to me to put Lilligant, the Pokemon that celebrities apparently really like, on the Jets. Moving over to the AFC North, and we're going to start with the Bengals. So the Bengals, first and foremost, get Incineroar. Incineroar is a fire dark type, and Incineroar is a tiger Pokemon. Just seems like a really good fit here. It's got black stripes on it, like the Bengals logo. It's red and not orange, but it's kinda close-ish to the team's color scheme. So there you go, in center war. Also, added bonus, Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, obviously huge star players on the Bengals. They both played college ball at LSU, and LSU also uses the tiger as its mascot, so it's like a double reference, which is great. Next up, we have Zeb Strika. Zeb Strika is here to reference the Bengals' white color rush, alternate uniforms, the sort of white and black stripes, kind of like a zebra. I know it's a reference to white tigers, but also, kind of looks zebra-y. So Zeb Strika, the electric type zebra, is here for the Bengals. Next up is Dodrio. Dodrio is Pokemon number 85, which makes it the perfect reference to Chad Ochocinco Johnson, one of the most well-known former Bengals. He, of course, wore the number 85. Ocho played wide receiver. He was pretty fast. Dodrio has a pretty high speed stat. So Dodrio is not only a good fit because of the numbers, but also because the speed makes it a good fit for the fast, athletic wide receiver that Ochocinco was. Pokemon number 4 for the Bengals, Licky Licky, normal type. What possible reference am I making here? Licky Licky is a geography reference. So, Cincinnati is on the confluence of two rivers, the Ohio River and the Licking River. So there we go. Licking River, Licky Licky. That is why the normal type Pokemon is here. Speaking of rivers, Pokemon number 5 is Basculegion, water and ghost type. So the most common fish that fishermen pull up from the Ohio River is the bass. Basculegion is a bass Pokemon, and it is also the evolved form of Basculin, so that makes Basculegion a more viable bass-like Pokemon option for the team. Bengals fans, take your pick between which version of Basculegion you'd prefer to have on your team. Either way, good fit for the team. And Pokemon number 6 is Nidoqueen. Nidoqueen is a poison and ground type. And Nidoqueen is here because one of Cincinnati's nicknames is the Queen City, so it only felt appropriate to give them the Queen Pokemon. Sidebar, yes, I know there are lots of Queen cities in the United States. The Bengals win the Queen City reference today. So, there we go, Nidoqueen. Next up, Baltimore Ravens. So the Baltimore Ravens team, of course, we've got to start with Corviknight, Steel Flying type, and it is the Raven Pokemon. Perfect. Next, Weezing. Weezing is a poison type, and Weezing is the air pollution Pokemon to Muck's water pollution, right? Baltimore, apparently, I learned upon doing research, has been having a pretty significant battle regarding air pollution in their city and in their area over the last 20 or so years. Back in 2005, MIT researchers declared that Baltimore had the worst air in the nation. In 2014, Baltimore ranked as the 81st most polluted locality by the EPA out of 9,000 localities in the study. There's been some legal battles over regulating certain industries in the Baltimore area that contribute a lot of air pollution to their environment. So having the air pollution Pokemon here made sense. Plus he's purple. Baltimore's are kind of a dark purpley. It's not the same purple, but good enough. Pokemon number 3 is Kingler, water type here. Chesapeake Bay, which Baltimore is located on, does a ton of crab fishing, right? Produces a great harvest of blue crabs. Baltimore, pretty well known for its crab food, its use of crabs in food. And so I had to have the crab Pokemon on the team. Did consider Cloth, actually, Rock-type crab Pokemon from Generation 9, because Cloth's shiny is blue, and the most common crab in Chesapeake Bay is the blue crab. But I decided against it because I would rather have put a water type on the Baltimore Ravens. So, Kingler is there for that. And also, kind of as a fun little added bonus, former Baltimore Raven Michael McCreary, who was defensive end for the Ravens, he wore number 99. Kingler is Pokemon number 99. Baltimore Ravens don't have any retired numbers, but McCreary is part of their Ring of Honor, so that felt like a nice little added bonus to the Kingler connection. Number 4 is Rillaboom. So Rillaboom is here because Rillaboom is a drummer Pokemon. There's a couple of moves where he pulls out a drum from his back, and his Gigantamax form in Pokemon Sword and Shield has this massive drum set. Now, the Baltimore Ravens, pretty famously, have a marching band. They're actually one of only 2 NFL teams with a marching band. But I would argue that the Baltimore Ravens marching band is the much more well-known of the 2. Down in the comments, let me know who you think has the other marching band, and we'll see if I'm right. But the Baltimore Ravens marching band is definitely pretty well-known. So it only seemed right to add a music-based Pokemon to the Ravens roster here. Of the music Pokemon, Rillaboom felt like it made the most sense because he's a drummer. Every good marching band needs a great percussion section. So Rillaboom seemed like the good fit, even though he's a rock and roll drummer technically. Still felt like the best fit. Next up is Electrode, and Electrode, again, this one's a little bit of a journey, so stick with me, right? Electrode, electric type, and Electrode is referencing the Star-Spangled Banner. So, during the War of 1812, Francis Scott Key, the guy who wrote the poem Star-Spangled Banner, which the national anthem of the United States is based on, Francis Scott Key wrote that poem about the British bombardment of Fort McHenry, which is in Baltimore. So that song is basically about Baltimore. And in the song, it references sort of explosions happening over the fort. During the 4th of July, we of course set off fireworks, which are explosives. So, there's a lot of explosion connection to the Star-Spangled Banner, and thus to Fort McHenry. There's an explosion connection there. Now, what Pokemon is most famous for using the move Explosion? Electrode. So that's why Electrode is here. Electrode is a reference to the Star-Spangled Banner. I swear it makes sense. The last Pokemon on the Ravens is Sirfetch'd. Sirfetch'd is a fighting type Pokemon, and did you know that fencing is the state sport of Maryland? I certainly didn't before I started doing research on this. So anyway, here's Sirfetch'd, right? Sirfetch'd is sort of holding a sword. Fencing is, sword fighting with rules. So it seemed like a good fit. And of course, Maryland was one of the original British colonies, so it's like an added bonus that Sirfetch'd happens to be from Galar, the region that is based off of England. Next up, we have the Steelers. First Pokemon for the Steelers felt really obvious to me, and that was Girder. Girder is a fighting type, and he's carrying around a steel beam, so it just made a ton of sense. Now, Girder is not a final evolution. The final evolution of this line is actually Conkeldurr. So obviously, from a team viability standpoint, you would rather have Conkeldurr over Girder. This is a trade evolution, however, so Girder is still viable. It fits the team better vibes-wise, but I'm sure, if the Steelers were an actual Pokemon team, they would probably bite the bullet and just evolve their Girder in order to have the best Pokemon. Second Pokemon for the Steelers is Aggron, a Steel and Rock type. I mean, the Steelers needed to have a Steel-type Pokemon on their team, right? It was just too perfect to make sure that to leave them without a Steel-type Pokemon. Aggron is especially appropriate because Aggron is extremely defensive. It's got an insanely high defense. Well, of course, the Steelers are well known for typically having good defenses, but really, really famously, their defense of the 1970s was called the Steel Curtain. And this was, an insanely dominant defense led by an extremely dominant front four. So, Steel Curtain reference for Aggron, who has this very, very high defense stat, just felt, too perfect. Pokemon number 3 is Slowbro. So Slowbro is Pokemon number 80. And that era, right, the Steel Defense era of the 70s, was also when Terry Bradshaw was their quarterback, so it was a really dominant era. And the last Super Bowl they won in that era was played in 1980. It was technically for the 1979 season, but the game took place in 1980. Slowbro is Pokemon number 80, Water and Psychic type, by the way, forgot to mention that. Slowbro is pretty bulky, so it's another good reference to the sort of tough defensive style of football that the Steelers of the era were very famous for. So that's why Slowbro is here, as another reference to that era. Next up is Vespiquen. Vespiquen is yellow and black. Those are the Steelers' colors. Also, the Steelers have their sort of famous, or perhaps infamous, Bumblebee jerseys. Vespiquen is the bee Pokemon. Felt like a good fit. There's another bee Pokemon, probably more well-known, Beedrill, but I wanted to use Beedrill somewhere else, so Vespiquen ends up on the Steelers instead. Pokemon number 5, I think this one, for me, personally, I think is the biggest stretch on the Steelers, but don't worry, I've got a reason, just like I have a reason for everything else, and it's Watchog. Watchog is a normal type, and Watchog is here as a reference to the movie Groundhog Day. So in the movie, right, Bill Murray's character is a weatherman from Pittsburgh, and travels to Punxsutawney to cover Groundhog Day. Punxsutawney is, of course, famously home to the groundhog Punxsutawney Phil, and Watchog is basically as close to a groundhog Pokemon as I could get. Punxsutawney is not, particularly close to Pittsburgh, but it's, it's not that far. So, yeah, Watchog is a Groundhog Day movie reference. And bringing up the rear on the Steelers is Ice-Cube. So, the Pittsburgh hockey team are the Penguins. Ice-Cube is a Penguin Pokemon. Also, Ice-Cube has an ability called Ice Face, which allows him to absorb one hit without taking any damage. Kind of lines up well with the general theme of several of Pittsburgh's Pokemon being bulky. So that is the Steelers. Next up, wrapping up the AFC North, are the Cleveland Browns. So first up on the Browns is Mabostiff, a dark-type Pokemon here. And Mabostiff is a reference to the dog pound, right? Big part of Cleveland Brown tradition and culture, and sort of the various dog Pokemon to reference the dog pound. I liked Mabostiff for the Next up is Hitmonlee. So Hitmonlee here is a reference to Lou Groza. So Lou Groza was a legendary place kicker. He's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and he played his entire NFL career for the Cleveland Browns. He's really early guy in the grand scheme of things. But so you might not really be familiar with his accomplishments, but according to the Pro Football Hall of Fame website, Groza, quote, was the first kicker to be considered a threat to put points on the board from 40 to 50 yards out. The Hall of Famer raised the bar for kickers, and today, the Lou Groza Award is given to college football's top place kicker. So, obviously, this kicker, very important in the history of the NFL, very important in the history of the Browns. So it only made sense to put the kicking Pokémon, Hitmonlee, on the Browns team to reference Lou Groza. Also, it just so happens that Hitmonlee is brown, so that kind of works too. Next up is Toxtricity, who's a poison and electric type, and is an electric guitar / electric bass, depending on which form of Toxtricity you have, playing Pokemon. That's sort of its whole thing. Cleveland is home to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, so that is why Toxtricity is here. Next up, we have a Sandaconda. Sandaconda is a ground type. Sandaconda is here because of its ability. So one of Sandaconda's abilities is Shed Skin. Now, what is the reference there? Well, the Cleveland Browns have gone through a lot of quarterbacks in their history. They go through quarterbacks like crazy, and you can find pictures online of Browns fans wearing custom jerseys with the names of all of their many, many, many starting quarterbacks listed on the back. So you could say, in a way, that Cleveland sheds quarterbacks. And of course, one of Sandaconda's abilities is Shed Skin. So it felt like an appropriate reference. Next up is Drifblim. Drifblim is hot air balloon / blimp Pokemon. It's Ghost and Flying type, and it's here because Goodyear is headquartered in Akron, Ohio, and that's not that far from Cleveland. Of course, Goodyear produces the famous Goodyear blimps, which are pretty associated with various sports games, including football games, and so Drifblim felt like a good fit for the team. And finally, bringing up the rear for the Cleveland Browns is Floatzel. Floatzel is orange, so, one of the Cleveland Browns' colors. Cleveland is on Lake Erie, so, again, trying to get a water Pokemon on the team made a lot of sense. And also, Floatzel evolves from its pre-evolution Buizel at level 26. Well, if you combine the SA allegations of Deshaun Watson, quarterback, he's got 24 SA allegations against him. Insane. And another quarterback on their roster, Jameis Winston. Editing Ben here. In the video here, I say that Jameis Winston is on the roster of the Cleveland Browns, but of course, he is no longer on the roster of the Cleveland Browns. He is currently on the roster of the New York Giants. So he left the roster of the Browns. Still think it kind of fits. The 2024 season is the most recent season, but I would have felt dumb if I didn't bring up the mistake I made. So, sorry about that. Anyway, enjoy the video. He's got 2 SA allegations against him. That's a total of 26 SA allegations in that quarterback room. At least 26. So, because Buizel evolves and Floatzel at level 26, it sort of had a good, lined up well there. Sidebar, yeah, I know everyone finds Jameis Winston, charming or funny or whatever. I did too, until I was reminded of the SA allegations against him. I don't find a guy that has SA allegations against him charming. So, sorry, Jameis, I don't find you particularly funny or charming anymore. But moving on to the AFC South, and we're going to start with the Jacksonville Jaguars. First Pokemon in the Jacksonville Jaguars is Luxray. Luxray's an electric type. It's got kind of like an appropriate blue color for the Jaguars, which is good. Now, there's not really a Jaguar Pokemon, but Luxray is a cat-like Pokemon. The Shinx line is sort of based on the Lynx, so it felt, like a close enough connection there, right? Second Pokemon for the Jaguars is Feraligatr. Feraligatr is sort of, again, kind of an appropriate blue color for the team, and is another, alligator Pokemon. As I said back when I was talking about the Miami Dolphins, Florida is home to a lot of alligators, and so I wanted to make sure every Florida team had a gator/croc Pokemon to represent that. And Feraligatr ended up on the Jaguars, so that's why he ended up here. Number 3 is Clefable. So Clefairy, in sort of some of the lore, Clefable's a fairy type, by the way. Clefairy, in some of its lore, is believed to be from the moon, or at least has a very strong connection to the moon. And so, as Clefairy evolves into Clefable, you can assume that all that also holds true for Clefable, as sort of having this strong association with the moon. It evolves from Clefairy via the Moonstone. Well, Cape Canaveral, which is the place where NASA's rockets are launched, is in Florida. It's on the Atlantic coast. It's not exactly like right next door to Jacksonville, but it's also not crazy far from Jacksonville, all things considered. So I wanted to have a moon connection to reference Cape Canaveral. NASA's obviously, that NASA connection there. And so, yeah, Clefable is on the Jags. Next up is Cinderace. Cinderace is a fire type, and Cinderace is a little soccer-playing rabbit guy. Well, the NFL has been experimenting with having several international games each season, and particularly games in London. Of all of the NFL teams, the Jacksonville Jaguars have the most connection with the London football games. Their owner seems to have a really particular interest in making the Jags popular in the UK, and so they refer to London as sort of their second home, and so having that sort of England connection with Cinderace here, that soccer connection, right, feels good, especially because the NFL games that are played in the UK are played in soccer stadiums usually. And also, the Jaguars owner not only owns the Jaguars, but he also owns a football club, Fulham, which is a Premier League soccer team in the UK. So Cinderace just really felt like an appropriate connection, appropriate representation for that England connection for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Next up is Victreebel. Victreebel's grass and poison type. Victreebel is Pokemon number 71. Only one single Jaguars player has been inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame as of now in April of 2025. And that's Tony Boselli. He was an offensive tackle, and he wore the number 71. So Victreebel is here to reference that. And then finally, wrapping up the Jacksonville Jaguars is Delibird. So Delibird is here to reference the 2017 Jacksonville Jaguars. In the 2017 season, Jacksonville went all the way to the AFC Championship game, and this was largely due for the proficiency of their defensive unit, which was nicknamed Saxonville because of their very high sack rate. Well, Delibird is sort of the Santa Pokemon and is always found with its sack. So there we go. Pokemon carrying around a sack, Saxonville. Perfect. Also, kind of fun little bonus, Delibird's signature move is called Present. which has a 50-50 chance of restoring the opponent's health or causing damage. Similarly, Florida's weather is either super, super nice, or you're getting a hurricane or a random rainstorm in the middle of the day. You know, it feels like you got 50-50 odds of good weather. So that's Jacksonville. Moving on to the Houston Texans. First up on the Houston Texans is Tauros. Kind of seems like a no-brainer. It's a bull Pokemon. Kind of matches the logo. Next up is Crobat. Poison and flying type. There are a lot of bats that live in Texas. Texas is the state with the most bats in the United States, so I wanted to give one of the Texas teams Crobat. Now, there just so happens to be a cave near San Antonio that is home to more bats than anywhere else in the United States. San Antonio is not particularly near either of the two NFL Texas teams in Houston or Dallas, but San Antonio is closer to Houston than it is Dallas, so Houston gets Crobat over Dallas. Next up is Bramblegast. Bramblegast is a ghost and grass type and is a tumbleweed Pokemon. I wanted to put the tumbleweed Pokemon on a team that felt like it was referencing the Wild West. So that either leaves teams in the Southwest slash, Texas, because of the strong association Texas has with that sort of era. Parts of Texas are the Southwest. Houston and Dallas are both in the east part of the state, but it doesn't matter. Anyway, tumbleweed Pokemon, good reference to that sort of Wild West vibe, right? So why isn't it on the Cowboys? Well, I had a different grass type in mind for the Cowboys. And why isn't it on the Cardinals? They play in Arizona. That's more Southwest than anywhere else. I also had a different grass type in mind for the Cardinals. So the Texans get Bramblegast. Next up is Lunatone. Lunatone Rock and Psychic type. Moon Pokemon, right? NASA's Mission Control is based in Houston, thus the famous Houston we have a problem thing that astronauts say when they have a problem. So it felt appropriate to have the Moon Pokemon on a team for a city that's so closely related to NASA. Next up is Hitmonchan. Hitmonchan is fighting types, the punching Pokemon, and Hitmonchan is here to reference Andre Johnson, wide receiver, just recently got into the Hall of Fame, played for the Texans, obviously, and there's this really, really iconic fight between Andre Johnson and the Titans' Cortland Finnegan.
Toss them both out because of this action right here. Finnegan gets the first shot, then gets his helmet knocked off. He takes off Johnson, and now Johnson is going to get a couple of good shots in there.
Where, you can see Andre really just sort of punching the hell out of Finnegan. So Hitmonchan is here to reference that. And lastly, we have Gastrodon. You can pick whichever of these two Gastrodon forms you prefer. I don't think it really matters that much. I prefer the pink and brown version of Gastrodon, but either way, doesn't matter. Gastrodon is a water and ground type. And Gastrodon is here because of Houston being sort of on Galveston Bay. It's very near Galveston, Texas. So I wanted to have a water type here. And Gastrodon learns the move Muddy Water by Level Up. And so that made it kind of a fun reference to basketball commentator Charles Barkley's infamous dirty-ass water joke about Galveston, Texas. So that felt like a good fit for the team. So Gastrodon is here. Moving on to the former Houston team, the Titans. Formerly, of course, the Houston Oilers. And their first Pokemon is Colossal. Colossal is a rock and fire type. Now, the Titans, like I said, they used to be the Oilers. Unfortunately, there is no oil Pokemon. There's no gasoline Pokemon. So, I pivoted and I picked a different fossil fuel Pokemon, which is Colossal, who's obviously based on coal. Also, it works out well because, you know, the Appalachian mountain range runs through Tennessee. There's been a lot of coal mining in the mountains in Tennessee. So also a good sort of regional reference there. Also, Colossal's name sounds like colossal. So it works as a good reference to the idea that Titans are these colossal creatures. Next up is Umbreon. And Titans fans, I'm really sorry about this, but Umbreon is here to represent one of the most iconic moments in the history of the Super Bowl. Umbreon is a dark type, of course. Umbreon is 3 feet tall, which is 1 yard. So Super Bowl 34, very last play of the game. Titans wide receiver Kevin Dyson trying to get a touchdown to potentially tie up the game, or maybe even win it if they go for 2 extra points. He comes up 1 yard short, 3 feet short of that touchdown attempt. Extremely famous moment in the history of the Super Bowl. I'm really sorry, Titans fans, but that is, of course, why Umbreon is here to reference that moment. Now, there are other 3-foot-tall Pokemon. Why is Umbreon the one that I ended up picking? Well, Umbreon's a dark type, and, you know, it was a really dark moment for Titans fans. But also, Umbreon was a Generation 2 Pokemon. The Generation 2 Pokemon games released in Japan in 1999, which was the year of that NFL season. And the Generation 2 Pokemon games released in North America in 2000, which was the year that Super Bowl was played in. So a Gen 2 Pokemon was the best fit. Next up is Slurpuff, a fairy type. Slurpuff is the cotton candy Pokemon, and the guy who invented cotton candy, or at least invented the cotton candy machine, was William Morrison, who is from Nashville, which is of course where the Titans play. Next up is Shiny Orthworm. Shiny Orthworm is a steel Pokemon, and I did pick the shiny variant because of the coloration, right? It's got a nice light blue coloration. Titans play in light blue jerseys. And Orthworm is one of the Titan Pokemon in Scarlet and Violet. Wanted to make sure that I put one of the Titan Pokemon on this team. Because Shiny Orthworm kind of has that right coloration, it ended up winning and becoming the Titan Pokemon for the Titans. Number 5 is Cofagrigus, Ghost-type Pokemon. Cofagrigus looks like an Egyptian sarcophagus. Egyptian sarcophagi were sometimes buried in pyramids. Well, Memphis, Tennessee is famously home to a massive pyramid. A giant glass pyramid. It's apparently the 10th largest pyramid in the world. It was originally built as a sports arena, but it is now a fast pro shop. But anyway, so that pyramid Tennessee connection was enough for me to give Titans Cofagrigus. And then finally for the Titans is Mudsdale. Mudsdale is a ground type and is a horse Pokemon. So Nashville is the home of the Country Music Hall of Fame. That's the center of country music in the United States. And a pretty common subject of country music, one that is at least a pretty common subject of memes about country music, is talking about your horse. So I wanted to get a horse Pokemon on the Titans. Mudsdale, I thought, fit the best for the team and vibes-wise. Moving on to the last team in the AFC South, speaking of horses, is the Indianapolis Colts. So the first Pokemon for the Indianapolis Colts is Galarian Rapidash, Psychic and Fairy type. It is, of course, a horse Pokemon, really a unicorn Pokemon, but it's a horse Pokemon. It does feature the color blue in its mane and in its tail. It has primarily white fur, so it still feels like a good good fit. I did consider normal Rapidash, but I decided to actually change my mind because I wanted to make space for a different fire type for this team. And so normal Rapidash got replaced with Galarian Rapidash, and normal Rapidash found its way to a different team. So that's the first Pokemon here. Second Pokemon is Tropius. Tropius is a grass and flying type, and Tropius is reference to Andrew Luck. So Luck was an extremely talented quarterback for the Colts. Unfortunately, the Colts did not invest in protecting Luck. He had a number of pretty severe injuries, which caused him to retire early. Very unfortunate. Luck, however, played his college ball at Stanford. And for some reason, Stanford's mascot is a tree. So Tropius is also kind of a tree Pokemon. Tropius, it is. So there we go. Speaking of Colts quarterbacks, we have Archeops. So Archeops is rock and flying type. Of course, yeah, so there is some type overlap here between Tropius and Archeops. They only share 2 weaknesses. They sort of fill different roles on teams. So I feel like this is an occasion where I was okay with having a duplicate typing here. But anyway, Archeops is here as a reference to a really controversial moment surrounding the Colts' current quarterback, Anthony Richardson, from the 2024 season. So Archeops' ability is called Defeatist. And in a game against the Texans in the 2024 regular season, Richardson pulled himself out of the game because he was too tired, which does seem like a crazy thing to do, but he did, in fact, do that. So that seems to line up pretty well with a Pokemon whose ability is Defeatist, like, Archeops. Next up is Arcanine. This is the other fire type I mentioned I wanted to make room for on the Colts. And it's, Arcanine. So Arcanine is the evolved form of Growlithe. Growlithe is sort of most famous for being the Pokemon we see Officer Jenny with all the time in the Pokemon anime. The Colts have had a number of really well-known quarterbacks in their team history. And one of their most famous quarterbacks was, of course, Peyton Manning, legendary quarterback for the Colts for the 2000s, longtime franchise quarterback for them before he ended up on the Broncos later on in his career. But Manning's nickname was the Sheriff. So what is a sheriff but an officer of the law, like Officer Jenny? So Growlithe, Officer Jenny, Arcanine, evolved form of Growlithe, reference to Peyton Manning. That's how Arcanine ended up here. Next up is Alolan Persian. Alolan Persian is a dark type. The Colts were founded in 1953. Pokemon number 53 is Persian. I needed Cantonian Persian, the base version of Persian, on a different team. So Alolan Persian ends up on the Colts. Plus, Alolan Persian has a blue gem in his head anyway, as opposed to the red gem of Kanto Persian. So that's, a better fit for the Colts anyway than standard Persian. Pokemon number 6, our final Pokemon here is Golduck. Water type. Golduck is blue. And yes, Indianapolis is on a river, so obviously water type is appropriate, but that's not the real reason Golduck is here, right? Golduck is here to reference Johnny Unitas, a legendary quarterback for the Colts. He helped redefine the position of quarterback. He's still considered one of the most important guys to ever play the position. I am now realizing that I gave the Colts 4 Pokemon that represent various quarterbacks, which was not totally intentional, but oh well, here we are, right? So how is Golduck referencing Unitas? Well, Johnny Unitas was drafted in 1955 Golduck is Pokemon number 55. Also, so that's the connection there. There's another one. I think this other connection is a little bit of a stretch, but I thought of it, so I'm including it here. Unitas was actually originally drafted by the Steelers, but before he ever played a single game for the Steelers, he was cut because the coach at the time thought that Johnny Unitas wasn't smart enough to play the position of quarterback. He then went on to join the Colts. He spent his entire NFL career with the Colts, if I'm remembering correctly, and he became one of the most important and well-regarded quarterbacks in the history of the NFL, right? Well, Psyduck, Golduck's pre-evolution, is considered a bit of a dumb Pokemon. This is something that comes up a lot in the anime in particular. But its Pokédex entries reference the great power it holds within, and the great power it can learn to harness with the proper trainer. So just like the Steelers didn't put in the effort to harness Johnny Unitas' skills, somebody might overlook Psyduck and Golduck, but the Colts knew they had something special, and that's why Golduck is here. So that's the AFC South. Moving on to our last AFC division, we have the Kansas City Chiefs start out the AFC West. First Pokemon for the Kansas City Chiefs is Volcarona. Volcarona is a bug and fire type, and Volcarona is here because there were a few Generation 5 Pokemon that seemed like they were Game Freak's attempt to make Pokemon to represent Native American civilizations. Most of those Pokemon were actually referencing Latin American native civilizations as opposed to North American native civilizations. Unfortunately, I don't think there really are any Pokemon that are inspired by North American, Native American civilizations. But Volcarona is definitely a Pokemon that seems to be inspired by this sort of Native American civilization thing. Well, of course, the Kansas City Chiefs, who play in Arrowhead Stadium, are inspired, I'll say, by Native Americans and Native American culture. You might also say they're appropriating that stuff. Who's to say? But Volcarona is here to represent that connection. Also, Volcarona's coloration kind of made more sense than the other Generation 5 options. It's got red and white as part of its colorations. The Chiefs are red and white, so there we go. Pokemon number 2 for the Chiefs is Hisuian Zoroark. Hisuian Zoroark is a normal and ghost type. And I'm giving Zoroark to the Chiefs because they play in a place called Kansas City, but they play in Kansas City, Missouri, not Kansas City, Kansas. There is actually a Kansas City, Kansas, but it's kind of a suburb of Kansas City, Missouri. Now, Zoroark has an ability called Illusion, where it will disguise itself as a different Pokemon when you send it out onto the field. So, just like you'd think Kansas City is in Kansas, but it's actually in Missouri, you think it's one thing, it's actually another. So too does Zoroark's Illusion ability cause it to appear as one thing, but it's actually another thing. And the Chiefs get the Hisuian variety because I needed regular Zoroark on a different team, and also, it's white and sort of red, so works with their colors nicely. Next up is Oinkalong. Again, both varieties here, pick your favorite. Oinkalong is a normal type, so you are doubling up the normal type with Hisuian Zoroark, but here's the interesting thing. The only weakness that normal has is fighting, but the ghost type is immune to fighting type attacks. So Oinkalong and Hisuian Zoroark don't actually share any weaknesses. So it's basically not like having a double typing here at all. So Oinkalong's here to reference Kansas City style barbecue. Kansas City style barbecue is extremely well known, apparently delicious. I've got family in Alabama, so I'm for deeper South style barbecue, but regardless, Kansas City barbecue is well known, well liked. Oinkalong is a pig. Pork is something that is frequently used in barbecue. So there you go. That's why Oinkalong's here. Next up is Walrein. Walrein is an ice and water type. And Walrein's got this nice, luxurious walrus mustache on its face. Well, of course, this is a good reference to the Chiefs' head coach, Andy Reid. Andy Reid has a luxurious walrus mustache. He's even sometimes called a walrus, like Walrein, right? And also, Walrein, part ice type. Kansas City gets really cold during the winter when the playoffs are being held. And in particular, it made me think of the January 13th, 2024 playoff game the Chiefs had against the Dolphins. That playoff game was famously cold, like insanely cold. You can actually see in the broadcast icicles forming on Andy Reid's mustache, so that ice-type connection is even more appropriate. Next up is Cleavor. Cleavor is a bug and rock type, so we are doubling up on the bug typing with Volcarona, but Volcarona and Cleavor feel different, like they fill very different roles in a team. Volcarona is a very special-oriented Pokemon, whereas Cleavor is a very physical-oriented Pokemon. So because they fill different roles, I still think it's fine to have that double typing here. Now Cleavor is here because his hands are axes, and so it works as a reference to the stupid tomahawk chop thing that Chiefs fans do. And I know other sports teams do the tomahawk chop thing, but I think it's something, at least for me personally, I associate most with the Chiefs. So here's Cleavor for that reference. And finally, bringing up the rear for the Chiefs is Hypno. Hypno is a psychic-type Pokemon, and Hypno is a reference to Tony Gonzalez. So Tony Gonzalez was drafted in 1997, first round of the draft. Hypno is Pokemon number 97, so it matches the year that Gonzalez was drafted. Gonzalez is, of course, widely considered one of the greatest tight ends of all time. He set all kinds of records during his time in the NFL. So he's a very significant player in the history of the team, history of the sport, deserved representation on the team. So Hypno is there. Moving on. Los Angeles Chargers. So the Los Angeles Chargers, first Pokemon I have for them is Manectric. Manectric has the appropriate color scheme. It's also an electric type, so it lines up well with Chargers, that sort of lightning bolt logo that they use. So Manectric, good fit. Next up is Behem. Behem is a psychic type, and he's based off of aliens. In fact, Behem's pre-evolution, is LGM. Literally sounds like LGM, Little Green Men. So it's sort of an alien reference, right? The Southwest of the United States has had a ton of UFO and alien sort of sightings, rumors, whether you believe them or not. And so I wanted to get Behem on one of the Southwest teams as a connection to that. Then I also made the connection between aliens and the Church of Scientology, because the Church of Scientology has a number of beliefs related to extraterrestrials. Well, the Church of Scientology is headquartered just outside of LA. Some of its most famous members are movie stars like Tom Cruise. So again, another double reference here, right? Behem, alien Pokemon, Church of Scientology. So Behem had to go on one of the LA teams, I sort of felt, and I picked the Chargers. Next up is Beartic. Beartic is an ice type. You're probably wondering to yourself, what the hell is an ice type doing on an LA-based team? Okay, well, simmer down. So in Pokemon Black 2 and White 2, there's this really expansive side mode called Pokestar Studios, which is a reference to Hollywood, to films. And in Black 2 and White 2, in those games, you discover that the biggest movie star in Unova is Bryson, who's the former Ice-type gym leader for Unova. Bryson's main Pokemon, his ace Pokemon, is Beartic. when he was a gym leader. So it was a reference to Bryson, which makes it a reference to Hollywood. And I could have put it on the Chargers or the Rams, but I chose the Chargers for Beartooth. Next up is a Lowland Dugtrio. A Lowland Dugtrio is a ground and steel type Pokemon, and it's here because its design kind of calls to mind the stereotypical surfer dude, found in places like Hawaii, of course, which Alola is based on, but also Southern California, right? It's kind of a surfer dude Pokemon. The Chargers get a Lowland Dugtrio over the Rams. Obviously there's people who surf in the LA area, but the Chargers used to play in San Diego, which apparently has better surfing than LA. Not that I've ever been surfing, but yeah, apparently San Diego has better surfing than LA, and definitely has better surfing than St. Louis, which is the other place that the Rams have played. So, a Lowland Dugtrio ends up on the Chargers. Pokemon number 5 is Wailord. Wailord is the whale Pokemon, is a water type, and whale watching is of course common all along the Pacific coast, including in LA, including in San Diego. So it works here as a reference to that, but it's also here as a reference to the movie Anchorman. Because in the movie, Ron Burgundy claims that San Diego means whale's vagina.
I love this city. It's a fact. It's the greatest city in the history of mankind. Discovered by the Germans in 1904, they named it San Diego, which of course in German means a whale's vagina.
So that's not what it means. It's like, I'm pretty sure that's what it means. But, so it felt like a funny reference to that, to include the whale Pokemon on the team that used to play in San Diego. And lastly is Torkoal. The Southwest is, of course, home to a couple of different species of tortoise, including the desert tortoise and the Sonoran desert tortoise, which are apparently different species, even though both live in the Sonoran Desert in Southern California, so whatever. But Torkoal is, of course, based on a tortoise. It's a fire type, so it works well as a representative of that hot desert environment. Another thing is that Torkoal learns the move Heat Wave by Level Up. And Heat Wave is sort of described as, attacking the target with hot air or hot breath. So it's much like how a wave of dry, hot air might set the perfect conditions for wildfires, which of course happen all across Southern California, including tragically destroying large parts of Los Angeles early this year. So that is what Torkoal's here to reference. Next team are the Denver Broncos. So the Denver Broncos' first Pokemon is, of course, Cantonian Rapidash, your normal base Rapidash fire type. It's horse Pokemon, of course. One of the Broncos' colors is orange. Rapidash's fire main is primarily orange, so that's a good connection there, but mostly, horse Pokemon, right? Next up is Shiinotic. Shiinotic is a grass and fairy type Pokemon, and it is a mushroom Pokemon, of course. There's other mushroom Pokemon, but Shiinotic seems to be the more psychedelic mushroom Pokemon. Of course, the Broncos play at Mile High Stadium, so that felt like a fun little reference to psychedelic mushrooms, right? And also, fun fact, Colorado has, of course, been one of the states that's kind of leading the charge on decriminalizing recreational drugs. And particularly appropriately, Denver, Colorado, was the first U.S. city to decriminalize shrooms. So having the shroom Pokemon here, that's not what Game Freak would say, but, it just felt like a good connection. Next up for the Broncos is Pidgeot. Pidgeot's normal and flying type, of course. More importantly, Pidgeot is number 18 in the national Dex, which is a good reference to Peyton Manning's number. So Peyton Manning gets referenced on 2 teams because he's special, I guess. Manning was undoubtedly an elite quarterback, one of the greats to play the position, of course. And he won Super Bowl 50 with the Broncos and then immediately retired. I would have liked to put Pidgeot on the Colts. There were already flying types on the Colts, so I decided to go with Arcanine there, and Pidgeot here. So that's sort of the connection with Pidgeot and Peyton Manning. But there's an added bonus connection because 18 was also the number that Frank Tripucka, I think his name is pronounced, wore. Frank Tripucka was the very first quarterback of the Denver Broncos. He also wore 18, and the number was actually retired after his tenure on the team. But he did give permission for the number to be temporarily unretired for Peyton Manning, which is cool. Next up for the Denver Broncos is Shiny Rabska, Bug and Psychic type here. And to fully understand this choice, we have to go on a little bit of a journey here. So first, I want to show you Rabska's pre-evolution Relor. So this is the shiny version of Relor, right? So Relor rolls around a little ball. And in its shiny form, that ball is golden. Well, that golden ball looks nearly identical to the sprites for the Nugget item, right? Now, when Relor evolves into Rabska, its body becomes golden as opposed to the ball, but, there's still that gold connection and that gold nugget connection in particular. Denver saw its own gold rush. San Francisco 49ers are named after the California gold rush, and they have something for that as well. But Denver actually did see its own gold rush as well, and so I want to have Pokemon that reference that, especially because Denver's NBA team are the Nuggets. That name is a reference to the gold rush in Denver, not to chicken nuggets, right? It's a reference to gold nuggets. And so having Pokemon whose shiny coloration referenced gold nuggets seemed appropriate for Denver. Next Pokemon for Denver is Huntail. Huntail is a water type. This one's also a journey. So John Elway, legendary Broncos quarterback. He spent his entire career basically with the Broncos. But Elway was not actually drafted by the Broncos. He was actually drafted by the Baltimore Colts. However, Elway didn't want to play for the Colts. And so, long story short, he managed to force them to trade him very soon after being drafted. He ended up with the Broncos instead. He spent his entire career at the Broncos, sort of legendary quarterback. And it all started with that trade from the Colts to the Broncos. Seems appropriate because Huntail is a trade evolution. It's a Pokemon that only reaches its final form by being traded. So it felt good to have a reference to Elway that had to do with that trade, and I was having trouble finding another way to reference Elway. And I picked Huntail in particular because of its coloration. It's light blue and orange, which call to mind. Of course, the Broncos play in blue and orange, but particularly their throwback uniforms are lighter blue and a lighter orange, which work well for Huntail's colors. Finally, bringing up the rear for the Denver Broncos is Hisuian Avalugg, who I know looks extremely similar to regular Avalugg on the Bills. Hisuian Avalugg does have a different typing. Hisuian Avalugg is ice and rock instead of pure ice. Denver is located in the Rocky Mountains. It's got very, very snowy peaks, of course, at the higher elevations. Denver's NHL team is the Denver Avalanches. So Avalugg is, name sounds like Avalanche, of course, but it also learns to move Avalanche by level up. So it's a rock type, ties into the Rockies, ties into the Denver Avalanche. It just kind of makes sense there. So that's why Avalugg is here. And the last AFC team on the docket are the Raiders, the Las Vegas Raiders currently. First Pokemon for the Vegas Raiders is Obstagoon, who is a normal and dark type. So Obstagoon's got this white and black coloration. It matches well with the Raiders' colors. With Obstagoon's white, black, and gray. Raiders white, black, and gray. Obstagoon also has this like very over-the-top punk rock kind of design, which lines up pretty well with kind of the over-the-top and aggressive reputation that Raiders fans have, particularly back when they were the Oakland Raiders. You had pretty dedicated fans who went like all out in their outfits. Also, Obstagoon as a punk rock Pokemon works pretty well with the fact that Vegas is like this major entertainment destination. So that's why Obstagoon is here. Next up is Garbodor. Garbodor is a poison-type Pokemon. Now, the Las Vegas area is home to Apex Regional, which is the largest landfill in the United States. And so as a result, Vegas gets the trash Pokemon. Because that's what Garbodor is. Garbodor is the trash Pokemon. So there you go. Except it's Venusaur. Venusaur is Pokemon number 3. It's one of the OGs. But Pokemon number 3, Raiders have won 3 Super Bowls. So that's what the reference is there. And also, right, Venusaur is a Generation 1 Pokemon. Generation 1 Pokemon in particular have very large and devoted fan bases. Venusaur has a very devoted fan base. But Venusaur is not as popular as the other 2 Gen 1 starters. That said, the people who love Venusaur really love Venusaur. In the same way that the Raiders fans are really devoted to the Raiders, through thick and thin, and a lot of thin recently for them. So that's why Venusaur's here. Porygon Z, normal type, is our next Pokemon here. How do you get Porygon in the earlier Pokemon games? It's very simple. You get Porygon as a prize at the game corner. So in order to get Porygon, you have to spend money at the casino in Pokemon. Either by paying for coins to play the slot machines or just paying for the coins outright. Either way, you have to spend money at the casino in Pokemon to access Porygon. Of course, Vegas is famous for its casinos. So Porygon felt like a good reference to the casino scene in Vegas. And I wanted to go ahead and just give them the final evolution form, as opposed to the base Porygon, right? Pokemon number 5 is Hariyama. Hariyama is here as a reference to John Madden. So, John Madden is, of course, one of the most famous NFL coaches of all time. Widely considered to be one of the best to ever do it. He never had a losing season. He holds the highest winning percentage of any head coach who coached over 100 games. And, of course, like I said, he was a head coach for the Raiders. After his coaching, he sort of became more famous for his broadcast career, but he was really, really successful as the Raiders head coach. So what's the connection between John Madden and Hariyama? Well, there's actually a move in Pokemon called coaching. It's a really, really uncommon move. Like, it's not easy to get, not easy to access. Like, I didn't really know it was a move until I was sort of doing research for this. But there is a move called coaching. Now, in Generation 8, when it was first introduced, it was a move tutor move. In Generation 9, it's a TM move. So I wanted a Pokemon that could learn the move coaching on the team coached by one of the most famous coaches of all time, John Madden. Now, there's no Pokemon learns the move by level up, right? There's not a single Pokemon that learns the move by level up. But there's a pretty good number of them that learn the move by TM, and that includes Hariyama. And I picked Hariyama as the representation here because Hariyama's kind of a big guy, just like John Madden. So there we go. That's why Hariyama's here. And the last Pokemon for the Raiders is Milotic. Milotic is a water-type Pokemon. And in its original generation, Generation 3, Milotic really seemed tailor-made to showcase the contest system, which is where your Pokemon put on a show, put on an elaborate display. So basically, Milotic is putting on a show, and nothing epitomizes Vegas more than its shows, other than gambling, right? So that's a good enough reference as is, but also, right, one of the most famous things in Vegas is the water fountain at the Bellagio, which does these really elaborate water fountain shows. So again, a really good reference, a really good connection there. Sidebar, Vegas, you really gotta cut back on the amount of water you're using. You guys do not have enough water to go around in the Southwest, as is already. It's an environmental nightmare. But anyway, anyway. Milotic is on the Raiders to represent that aspect of Las Vegas. Also, the Raiders used to play in Oakland, which is of course in the San Francisco Bay Area, so having a water-type Pokemon on the team also references that Oakland connection as well. So, that wraps up the AFC West and wraps up the entire AFC. So, let's move on to the NFC. So, starting the NFC, we are starting with the NFC East, and we're starting with the Philadelphia Eagles. So, first team for the Eagles is, of course, Braviary. So, Braviary is an eagle Pokemon, right? It's normal flying type, it's the eagle Pokemon. Perfect fit. That's what we need to do. Second Pokemon for the Eagles is Tyranitar. So Tyranitar is very strong, very well-rounded Pokemon. It's got good offensive stats and defensive stats, much like the Eagles have, in the last few seasons, had really solid offenses and defenses as well. And also, it's, greenish, so kind of works. Again, not quite the right green, but, still green, still good. Next up is Phalanx. Phalanx, it's probably pronounced. Phalanx is a fighting-type Pokemon. And Phalanx is here to reference the Eagles' offensive line. So the Eagles had, I think undisputedly, the best offensive line in the league last season. And have had a really good offensive line for a while now. Phalanx is a single Pokemon, but he's made up of a bunch of guys, right? Phalanx is like a unit of Pokemon, which seems appropriate to represent the very efficient and in sync Eagles O-line. So that's why Phalanx is here. The only problem really is that Phalanx is made up of six little guys. The Eagles almost never run 6 personnel offensive line packages. Last season, I don't think they ran it at all. They may have, but it would have been extremely rare, so that's the only downside, but I still think that Phalanx works well as a reference to the O-line. Also, the way Phalanx kind of is in a little line does work kind of well as a reference to the brotherly shove / tush push. So, working together in harmony, Philadelphia's city of brotherly love, so Phalanx. Next Pokemon for the Eagles is Bronzong. Bronzong is the Bell Pokemon, and the city of Philadelphia is, of course, home to the Liberty Bell. So there we go. Bronzong, Steel and Psychic type. Next up is Drampa. Drampa is a normal dragon type. Another one of the stretch ones, but please hear me out. So Drampa's Pokédex entries highlight how friendly it is, which is a good fit for the city of brotherly love, which, Philadelphia is called. But more importantly than that, Pokédex entries about Drampa talk a lot about its loyalty, right? Eagles fans are famously loyal, famously devoted fan base. Now, I should mention that most of the references in the Pokédex to Drampa's loyalty are references to its loyalty to kids that it's befriended, but I still think it works well as sort of a general reference to the loyalty that Eagles fans have for their team. But another fun detail about Drampa that works well as a reference to the Eagles is that Drampa sometimes takes its love too far. In its Ultra Sun Pokédex entry, it reads, "If a child has made friends with is bullied, Drampa will find the bully's home and burn it to the ground." And Drampa's Shield Pokédex entry reads, "Drampa is a kind and friendly Pokemon, up until it's angered. When that happens, it stirs up a gale and flattens everything around." This seems like a really perfect reference to the destruction that Eagles fans can sometimes wreak upon the city of Philadelphia. So there we go. That's why Drampa is here. The final Pokemon for the Eagles is Roserade. Roserade is, of course, green. It's got some poison type. But the real reason it's here is it's the Rose Pokemon, which makes it a good reference to Howie Roseman. Howie Roseman is, of course, the GM for the Eagles. He's worked in the Eagles front office since 2000, so he's kind of a long-time staple of the organization. He is arguably the best GM in football today, at least in my opinion. So it really only makes sense to reference him with a team member on the Eagles Pokemon roster. And there we go. That's why Roserade is here. Okay, so next up are the New York Giants. First Pokemon for the New York Giants is Wishy-Washy in its school form. So this is a water-type Pokemon. Of course, I wanted a water-type because of water in the New York City area. But Wishy-Washy's school form is also one of the largest Pokemon. I think it's like the 5th or 6th largest Pokemon, something like that. So it's a very, very large Pokemon. And that works well, not only with the giant name, right? New York Giants is a giant Pokemon, but also it works well for the large market that the Giants play in, right? They play in the New York City area, it's an extremely large market. And Wishy-Washy is a particularly good representation for this because its school form is made up of a ton of individual Wishy-Washys coming together, which makes it a pretty good representation of the greater New York City area's massive population base. So yeah, that's why Wishy-Washy is here. Next up is Tinkaton. Tinkaton is a fairy and steel type, and Tinkaton is here for one reason and one reason only, and that is to counter the Patriots Pokemon team. So Tinkaton is a fairy and steel type, as I said, and it counters 4 of the Patriots' 6 Pokemon. Its fairy type moves have for super effective damage against Crawdont, Throw, and Appleton. And its steel type moves hit Alolan Ninetales for super effective damage. So it is a really good counter to the Patriots team. And thus makes it a good reference to the Eli Manning Giants, who somehow beat the Tom Brady Patriots in 2 Super Bowls. Height of the Patriots dynasty. And the Eli Manning quarterbacked New York Giants beat the Patriots in both Super Bowls they played against each other. This is despite the fact that, in the grand scheme of things, stats-wise, Eli Manning wasn't necessarily anything special. Eye test looked really good, at least in the playoffs, but stats-wise, he wasn't anything, particularly special. In the same way that Tinkaton, stats-wise, not particularly a special Pokemon, but really good at beating the Patriots. So that is what Tinkaton is here for. Next up is Bellossom. So Bellossom is here on the Giants for the same reason that Lilligant is on the Jets. It's a reference to Meadowlands. So Bellossom, obviously it's a flower Pokemon, so references the Meadowlands there. However, unlike Lilligant, which has Pokédex entries that talk about how popular it is with celebrities, Bellossom has no such Pokédex entries. And again, I think this makes sense to me, again, because Lilligant, as a Pokemon that celebrities like a lot, the Jets just seem to be referenced in more movies and TV shows than the Giants do. Not entirely sure why, but it just seems like that's the case. So there we go. Bellossom here, Lilligant there on the Jets. Next up is Druddigon. Druddigon's a dragon type. Pretty fearsome, just like the large New York City population base. Druddigon's color combination, blue and red, is very good for the Giants color combination. So it's got a good reputation. It's got the reputation you'd think a New York City-based team would have. It's got the coloration the New York City, the Giants have. But also, I mean, look at Druddigon, right? He looks pretty silly. He looks pretty dumb, dare I say. Just like, I don't know, the Giants front office has looked really dumb in the recent few years. So there we go. That's why Druddigon is here. Fifth Pokemon on the team is Mamoswine. Mamoswine is an ice and ground type. Did you know that the first sort of mastodon remains discovered by Europeans in sort of modern era, quote unquote, modern, was actually found in the Hudson River. It was a mastodon tooth. It was found in the Hudson River in 1705 and was then given to a member of the New York Assembly. So there you go. Mamoswine is, obviously based off of the woolly mammoth, based off of the mastodon. Now, the actual location of the discovery was not in the immediate vicinity of New York City or New Jersey, right? It was further up the Hudson River, but I still think it's a good kind of reference there. And also, Mamoswine is another very large Pokemon, which lines up well with the giant name. So, Mamoswine is here, Pokemon number 5. Pokemon number 6 is Gumshoes. Gumshoes is a normal type. Gumshoes is supposedly based off of a private investigator. Cities like New York City are a staple of the noir film genre that private investigators often star in. But also, Gumshoes looks like Donald Trump. And he, unfortunately, comes from New York. So there you go. You get a little Trump reference to New York. I hope you're happy. Next are the Dallas Cowboys. So the Dallas Cowboys are going to start off with Miltank. Miltank's a normal type. It is the cow Pokemon. And Dallas are the Cowboys. So I feel like it's pretty self-explanatory. Next is Starmie, water psychic type. The Cowboys symbol is the star. Starmie is a starfish. So again, I feels like an appropriate connection there. Next, I have 2 Pokemon actually to represent the Dallas Cowgirls. The Dallas Cowgirls are, I would say, the most famous NFL cheerleader squad. And the first of the 2 Pokemon I have to represent them is Sarina. Sarina is this very traditionally feminine-looking Pokemon, got long legs, so it seems to work well as a reference to the Cowgirls. And of course, the other reference to the Cowgirls is Oricorio in its pom-pom form, electric flying type. Oricorio is literally got pom-poms, literally the cheerleader Pokemon. So these 2 are our Dallas Cowgirls reference. Pokemon number 5 is Arbok. So, in an attempt to find a Pokemon that could represent some of the important figures from the organization's history, I eventually landed on Arbok. And Arbok is here because Arbok is Pokemon number 24. Well, legendary Cowboys head coach Tom Landry was born in 1924. Landry has, a ton of accomplishments to his name. He had a ton of success with the Cowboys. It's sort of what led the Cowboys to getting the nickname America's Team, which apparently was a nickname he didn't particularly like that much. So Arbok, as that 24 connection, felt like it fit well. And, there are lots of snakes that live in the South too, right? So having a snake Pokemon on a team that plays in the South also made sense. And then the final Pokemon for the Cowboys is Paldean Tauros, specifically the combat breed I picked, fighting type Pokemon. And the Texans obviously got base Tauros, Cantonian Tauros, but I still think the Cowboys deserved a bull Pokemon, a version of the bull Pokemon, because the Cowboys still have this association with the Wild West. I mean, they're literally called the Cowboys, right? But more specifically, Fort Worth is the city of cowboys and culture. That's what they call themselves. Of course, Dallas-Fort Worth, major metro area, home market for the Dallas Cowboys. And also, Fort Worth is home to the largest indoor rodeo in the world. So, obviously, a fierce bucking bull felt like a good connection to the lottery. So, Paldean Toros. Moving on to the Washington Commanders. So, first Pokemon of the Washington Commanders I have is Raichu. Raichu is an electric type. And Raichu is here because he's the main Pokemon of Lieutenant Surge. So, Lieutenant Surge is called the Lightning American in the original games. He's kind of referenced as a veteran of the U.S. military. As a sidebar, early Pokemon games made a ton of references to the real world. It was crazy. But, so Lieutenant Surge is the Lightning American, fought in a war, right? So having the main Pokemon of a guy who served in the U.S. military felt like a good way to reference the name of the team, which is the Commanders, which is another military rank. Speaking of Commanders, the second Pokemon is Toxicroak, poison and fighting type. Now, every Pokemon game has sort of an evil team, or almost every Pokemon game has sort of an evil team, and the evil teams typically have admins. Team Galactic's admins are called Commanders. They're the only evil team that does that. And one of the Commanders of Team Galactic, Commander Saturn, has Toxicroak as his sort of ace Pokemon, his main Pokemon. And so that felt like it was a good fit for this team because that Commander's connection, but also because Washington, D.C., which is sort of the home market for the Commanders, is built on a swamp. Toxicroak and its pre-evolution Croagunk, both poison fighting types, they're from sort of the swampy, marshy area of Sinnoh, the Great Marsh. And the routes sort of around Pastoria City is where you can find them. So felt like a good connection to the swamp that DC is built on. Next up is Magmortar. So Magmortar's fire type. Magmortar's arms are literally cannons. And the commander's name is based on the military. So there's that nice little weapon connection there. And also, maybe not most, but like many defense contractors, the people who make the weapons for the government are based in the DC metro area. That includes Lockheed Martin and Raytheon, two of the biggest defense contractors in the United States. So Magmortar felt like it was an appropriate reference to that. Next up is Fortress. So Fortress is another reference to the military-industrial complex. There's a lot of references to that here. But Fortress is, he's a little fortress guy. He's got cannons sticking out of the sides. Kind of looks like, it kind of works as a reference to the Pentagon, right? So Fortress is here, bug steel type. Next up, we have Snorlax. Snorlax is a normal type. Snorlax is here as a reference to Albert Haynesworth, player on the team. And famously, one of the biggest busts in team history, and arguably also in the history of the NFL. So Haynesworth was a very large defensive tackle that Washington signed to a 7-year, $100 million contract. Haynesworth didn't work out, and in part, this was because it seemed like he became lazy after signing a contract that gave him so much money. And so Snorlax both works as a reference to Haynesworth's large size. Snorlax is a very large Pokemon. But also Snorlax sleeps all the time. So again, it seems like a good reference to Haynesworth's alleged, at least, laziness. And then finally, we have Cherrim. So Cherrim has two forms. It's got overcast form, it's got sunny form, changes which form is in, depending on the weather. So Cherrim is the cherry Pokemon. And in particular, in its sunshine form, which activates on a sunny day, looks like a cherry blossom. Well, the DC area, Washington, DC, is famous for its cherry blossoms in the spring. So there you go. Cherrim to reference the cherry blossom. On to the NFC North, starting with the Detroit Lions. Pokemon number 1 is Pyroar. Pyroar is a fire lion Pokemon. So, obviously, right? I would probably go with the male Pyroar to represent the Lions, because the Lions logo is a male lion, but, either way, good to have the lion Pokemon on the Lions. Next up is Revavroom, Steel and Poison type. So Detroit is, of course, the Motor City, right? It is home to the headquarters for American car manufacturers, home for a really long time to auto factories. The Lions play on Ford Field, and Revavroom is a car engine. It's based on a car engine, so seems like the perfect fit for the Motor City. Next up on the Lions is Sawk. Sawk is a fighting type, and Sawk is blue. Again, not quite the right blue for the team, but close enough. But more importantly, Sawk is a fighting type. And, the team has this really good fighting spirit. The city has this really strong fighting spirit. And also, Sawk has the ability Sturdy. And basically what that means is that it's hard to knock Sawk out. If you do damage that should knock it out entirely, it'll hang on with one hit point. Which makes Sawk a really good reference to Dan Campbell's kneecaps speech. So when Dan Campbell first became head coach of the Lions, he gave the speech to the media where he's like, you'll knock us down, but we're going to get back up and we're going to bite your kneecaps on the way up. So I feel like that sturdy ability that Sawk has makes it a good reference to Dan Campbell's kneecap speech. Next Pokemon up is Garganackle. Garganackle is a rock type. And Garganackle is here because it's the salt Pokemon. There is a ton of salt that can be found in the Great Lakes Basin area in general. But in particular, Detroit is home to the Detroit Salt Company, which has this truly massive subterranean complex beneath the city to mine salt. So it made Detroit the perfect home for the salt Pokemon. Next up we have Mimikyu. Mimikyu is a ghost and fairy type, and Mimikyu is the disguise Pokemon. So this Pikachu-esque outfit is an outfit for Mimikyu. The true Pokemon is hiding underneath this Pikachu disguise. And this feels like a good reference to the fact that the Lions, while they're really good now, have historically really, really struggled. Of the teams in the NFL that have famously struggled, I would say that the Lions traditionally are like the poster child for long-suffering fan bases. And as part of their long history of suffering, you would often see Detroit fans wearing paper bags over their heads. Now, this is something that fans of other bad teams do, but again, I feel like it's something that's really associated with Detroit. So Detroit fans during the era where they were really, really bad would wear paper bags over their heads, disguising themselves. So making Mimikyu, the disguised Pokemon who hides its true face, as a reference to that, felt like a good connection. And lastly, bringing up the rear for the Lions is Chatot. Chatot is a normal and flying type. Chatot's head looks like a music note. And this is a reference to Motown. So Motown originated in Detroit. Motown is basically synonymous with Detroit. It's home to the Motown Museum, of course. So wanted to have a Pokemon that referenced that. Chatot seemed to fit nicely. Again, its head is literally a music note. So that's Detroit. Moving on to the Green Bay Packers. So I wanted to give the Green Bay Packers a cheese Pokemon. But there is no cheese Pokemon. Over 1,000 Pokemon, and we still don't have a cheese Pokemon. But there is a Pokemon that's based on another dairy product, and that's Vanillux. So Vanillux is based on ice cream, obviously, but still a dairy product. It's cold and snowy in Green Bay as well, so ice type like Vanillux, fits well enough. Next up is Cyclizar. Cyclizar is a normal and dragon type. And Cyclizar is a little motorcycle Pokemon. They're in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. There are people who like ride around Cyclizars like motorcycles. Well, Wisconsin, which of course is where Green Bay is also the home to Harley Davidson. So having a motorcycle Pokemon be with a team that plays in Wisconsin just seemed like it fit too well. Next up is Alakazam. So Alakazam kind of is here, it covers a couple different levels. So first of all, the Packers have shown a phenomenal amount of foresight on when it's time to move on from their franchise quarterback. And as a result, have managed to have a really solid run of great QB play, transitioning from Favre to Rodgers to now Jordan Love. And that foresight really does seem to be part of the reason why the Packers always seem to make it into the playoffs every year. They have that forward thinking, that foresight has helped them have sustained success. Alakazam, of course, learns the move foresight, so that works well. But also, Alakazam is a trade evolution Pokemon. The Packers are trade away their franchise quarterbacks. The Packers evolve. So that works as a reference. And finally, Alakazam is Pokemon number 65, which is the same year that the Packers Stadium was renamed Lambeau Field after Packers founder Earl Lambeau. So there you go. That's why Alakazam is here. Next up is Zangoose. Zangoose is a normal type, and Zangoose is here because in Pokemon canon, it has this really intense rivalry with Seviper. So I put Seviper on the Bears, and I put Zangoose here on the Packers to represent that rivalry. Because the Packers and the Bears also, of course, have a very intense rivalry. It's actually the oldest rivalry in the NFL, and it is, I would say, one of, if not the most famous rivalry in the league. Although just in general, I feel like the AFC North has really, really strong rivalries. But so that's what Zangoose is here for. Next up is Primeape. Primeape is a fighting type. So Lambeau Field received its name in 1965, yes, but it originally opened in 1957. And Pokemon number 57 is Primeape. Now Lambeau Field is pretty famous football stadium. I would say one of the more famous ones in the league. And part of what makes it so famous is how old it is. It's actually the oldest continuously operated stadium in the NFL. Chicago's Soldier Field is technically older, but I think there was one or two seasons where it wasn't in use while it was undergoing some renovations. But there was never a break in Lambeau's usage since it opened. So it felt good to reference that stadium, and Primeape made that good reference there. And also as a Generation 1 Pokemon, it is among the oldest Pokemon that were made. So it's kind of a double reference to the age of Lambeau Field. And the last Pokemon for the Green Bay Packers is Empoleon. Empoleon is a water and steel type. Packers need a water type. They're on Lake Michigan. But in particular, I was trying to find a Pokemon that would thrive in the cold climate up there. And I really was trying to avoid doubling up on the ice typing. I already doubled up a little bit on the normal typing with Zangoose and Cyclizar, so I wanted to avoid doubling up again here. And really, what does better in cold water than a penguin? Of course, Empoleon is a penguin. But crucially is not an ice type, it's actually a steel type, so it can do well in the cold water and avoids the doubling up of the ice typing. Plus, Green Bay is, of course, a Great Lakes port, right? That's why it's called Green Bay. And one of Empoleon's inspirations are icebreaker ships, which can, break the ice as it sails through. That's where its steel typing comes from. And of course, Lake Michigan does sometimes freeze over, and they need icebreaker ships to get into port at Green Bay. Also, Empoleon is an emperor penguin. Emperors are, of course, royalty. And with Green Bay's storied history, that basically makes Green Bay NFL royalty. They play in the old stadium. They won the first 2 Super Bowls. The Super Bowl trophy is named after Vince Lombardi, who was a legendary former head coach of the Packers. So that like royalty connection to Empoleon works well too. And finally, another great little connection here. Empoleon is also a reference to Napoleon, right? That name connection is there intentionally, so it's got some sort of French inspiration to it. Well, Green Bay was actually originally established by the French, specifically by a guy named Jean Nicolet. So, if that's the wrong pronunciation of his name, oh well. But yeah, so that's why Empoleon's here. I thought it was just a lot of great, like, little components all coming together. All right, Minnesota Vikings. So, first Pokemon for the Minnesota Vikings is Berserker. Berserker's a Steel type and is literally a Viking Pokemon. So, you know, what more needs to be said? So I do have something more I'm gonna say. And that is, in the Pokemon the First movie, there's actually a joke about Vikings. Jesse and James are rowing Ash and company to the island, and they're disguised as Vikings, and I think Brock makes a comment about, like, I didn't think there were Vikings anymore, and Ash says, they mostly live in Minnesota.
I think I'm gonna have one.
I didn't know Vikings still existed.
They mostly live in Minnesota.
And of course, Jesse and James in the Pokemon anime work with Meowth. Berserker is the evolved form of Galarian Meowth. So there we go. We've got the Viking Pokemon here, both to represent the team and to represent the Viking joke in Pokemon the First movie. Next up is Kangaskhan. Kangaskhan's a normal type. So the Vikings play in Minneapolis, but Minneapolis is one of the Twin Cities, right? Minneapolis and St. Paul. Sort of two very closely connected and related cities to each other. So having a Pokemon that referenced that Twin Cities aspect felt like it was a good idea. And Minneapolis is larger than its twin, than St. Paul, by quite a bit. And so Kangaskhan is, you know, you've got a larger Pokemon, but then you get the littler guy in the pouch. So the big mother and the little guy in the pouch, kind of like Minneapolis is a lot bigger than St. Paul. So that's the Twin Cities reference there. Next up is Staraptor. Staraptor is a normal and flying type. And it's here because one of, if not the oldest raptor system in the United States, raptor center, in the United States, is part of the University of Minnesota. So raptors are, you know, it's a type of bird. I'm not talking like dinosaur raptors, but it's a type of bird that includes like eels and owls and that type of thing. So raptors are really, really important birds. They're as part of our ecosystem. Staraptor is obviously a raptor. So Staraptor earns a spot on the Vikings to reference the University of Minnesota's Raptor Center. Next up is Sandy Shocks. Sandy Shocks is an electric and ground type. So when you look at Sandy Shocks, you see it has all of these, this black material that looks kind of like hair, stuck to the ends of its magnets. These are iron filings, right? Stuck to the end of its magnets. Fun fact, Minnesota is the largest producer of iron in the United States. So that felt like a pretty good reference, right? The iron filings on Sandy Shocks felt like a good reference to Minnesota producing a lot of iron. But an added benefit of this is, again, you know, it makes Sandy Shocks look like it's got this crazy hair. Sandy Shocks kind of looks like a kind of flamboyantly dressed musician or rock star. And so that felt like it worked well, kind of as a reference to Minnesota legend Prince. Next up is Swalot. Swalot is purple, which is Viking's primary color, and it has a golden mustache, which matches the golden mustache of the Vikings logo. So there you go. Next up is Infernape. So Infernape is a fire and fighting type Pokemon. And something that makes Infernape interesting is that it has an exactly equal attack and special attack stat in its base stats. It's exactly equal attack and special attack, and it has 104 for each, right? So in Pokemon, you would say that Infernape is a mixed attacker. But in football terms, probably a more appropriate term would be dual threat. Well, that makes it, Infernape, a good reference to legendary Vikings quarterback Fran Tarkenton. Tarkenton was, pretty early dual threat quarterback, and specifically he was one of the first guys to kind of prove that the dual threat quarterback, a guy who can both run the ball well and throw the ball well, could really excel in the NFL, right? So because he's this dual threat quarterback, Infernape is kind of this dual threat Pokemon, works pretty well as a reference to Tarkenton. So Infernape earns the spot. And wrapping up the NFC North is the Chicago Bears. First up is Ursaluna. Ursaluna is normal ground type and is a bear Pokemon. And there's a number of bear Pokemon, but I think Ursaluna kind of looks the closest to the Bears logo. So there you go. Next up is Probopass. Probopass is a rock and steel type. Probopass is here because of his mustache. Probopass's mustache makes it a good reference to Mike Ditka, the legendary former coach of the Chicago Bears. And of course, his classic look involved his prominent mustache. It's a very well-known look, right? It's brief reference in Super Bowl commercials this year with Matthew McConaughey, actually. So Mike Ditka, with his mustache, he led the Bears through one of the most successful periods in the team's history, including their dominant 1985 team. And this is kind of the other team, right, along with the 72 Dolphins, that are considered among the very best teams in the history of professional football. 1985 Bears, extremely good. They were led by Ditka. So the mustache connection is there to reference him. Next up is Rotom Fan. Rotom Fan is an electric flying type. Rotom Fan is here because Chicago is the Windy City. And so I wanted a Pokemon that referenced Chicago being the Windy City, and I didn't just want like a bird Pokemon, right? That didn't feel like a strong enough connection there. Really, the Pokemon that would best represent that idea are legendary Pokemon like Tornadus or Lugia, but because they're legendary Pokemon, they're ineligible. So I went with Rotom Fan instead, because he's a fan and he blows air, seems to represent the Windy City well enough. Plus, he's orange, which works well with the Chicago Bears colors. Next up is Tyrantrum. This is another doubling up on a typing here. I don't love doing it, but I didn't want to get rid of Probopass. I really wanted to put Tyrantrum on this team. They fill different roles. Probopass is a very defensive-oriented Pokemon. Tyrantrum is more of an attack-oriented Pokemon, so I think it's fine. But the reason I really wanted to put Tyrantrum on this team too is because of the relationship that Tyrannosaurus Rex has with Chicago. So Chicago is home to Sue, which is the most complete T-Rex fossil ever discovered. Sue, this T-Rex, has had a huge impact on paleontological research, particularly the research into the T-Rex. And she's also had this huge impact on tourism to Chicago, bringing huge crowds of people to the Field Museum to see this basically complete T-Rex fossil. So I really wanted to get a reference to the T-Rex on the Bears, and so Tyrantrum is here for that. Next up is Persian, the normal Cantonian Persian. So Persian is here because it is Giovanni's main Pokemon in the anime. Giovanni is obviously based off of the sort of stereotypical Italian mob boss. Chicago has very strong historical connections with the mob. Think Al Capone, right? And Giovanni might as well be based on Al Capone, more or less. So I think it makes a lot of sense then to have Persian as a Chicago Pokemon, as that sort of connection there. And then finally is Seviper, Poison-type Pokemon. It's got an intense rivalry with Zangoose, as I was talking about with the Packers. So Seviper is on the Bears, Zangoose is on the Packers to represent that old and iconic rivalry between the Bears and the Packers. We are moving on to the NFC South. So, 2 more divisions to finish up. NFC South, we're starting with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. First Pokemon for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers is Delmise. Delmise is a Ghost and Grass type Pokemon. And Delmise is a haunted, sunken ship anchor, possessed by the souls of the drowned. Well, seems pretty appropriate for the Buccaneers, because they are, of course, pirates, right? They're based on pirates. So, Delmise is here as that connection. Next up is Crocodile. As I said, with the Miami Dolphins and with the Jacksonville Jaguars, I wanted to make sure that every Florida team had a gator or croc-related Pokemon. And so Crocodile was the one that ended up on the Buccaneers. Also, Crocodile's name is sort of inspired by Crook. Pirates were, of course, outlaws and crooks. Also, Crocodile has this dark red and black coloration that kind of matches the Bucks colors. So, yeah, just works really well. Next up is Dragonite. Dragonite, dragon flying type, of course. Dragonite's this nice light orange color, which lines up really well with the Bucks' orange creamsicle kind of throwback uniforms, right? So I think that's kind of a fun reference. I actually think the Bucks should wear their orange creamsicle more often. I think that makes them more distinct, but whatever. Anyway, the other reason Dragonite's here is not just because of the light orange working well for that, but also Dragonite learns the move Hurricane by level up. And of course, Florida gets a lot of hurricanes, including Tampa Bay, so Dragonite also works well in that regard. Next up is Samurott. So, speaking of throwback uniforms, speaking of older logos, the Bucks' old logo is a pirate that has this sort of luxurious mustache. Samurott, of course, has a luxurious mustache. And they needed a water type on the team, because it's Tampa Bay. Next up is Magnezone, steel and electric type. So Magnezone is here because the National Magnet Lab, which is home to the most advanced magnetic research in the United States and among the most advanced magnetic research in the world, actually has 3 locations. 2 of those 3 locations are in Florida, at the universities of Florida and at Florida State University. So I wanted a magnet connection for one of the Florida teams because of the National Magnet Lab connection. Magnezone is, of course, the magnet Pokemon. And of the 3 Florida teams, Magnezone was the one that fit kind of best for the Bucks as opposed to the other 2 teams. So there we go. And also as an added bonus, Tampa Bay's hockey team is the Tampa Bay Lightning. So an electric type is just good to have here anyway. And then finally is Golem. Golem is a rock and ground type Pokemon. Again, we're doubling up on the ground typing. Never feel good about it. I feel like Golem is a little bit more of a defensive Pokemon, or Crocodile is more of an offensive Pokemon, so I think it's fine still. But Golem's here because the Buccaneers were an expansion team. They played their first season in 1976, and Golem is Pokemon number 76. So there we go. Next up are the Carolina Panthers. And starting things off with the Carolina Panthers is Liepard. Liepard is a dark type. Liepard is a Panther-esque Pokemon. So there we go. And also, Liepard's pre-evolution is called Purloin. And the Panthers' mascot is Sir Purr. So it's kind of perfect in that way. We also have Scovillain here. Scovillain is a grass and fire type. And Scovillain is the hot pepper Pokemon. This is, of course, a reference to Carolina Reaper. Very, very, infamously hot pepper. Now, the Panthers do play in North Carolina, and the Carolina Reaper originates from South Carolina, but the Panthers, claim to be the team for both Carolinas. Both Carolinas sort of embrace the Panthers. So, kind of worked. And also, it's a fun reference to Julius Peppers, Hall of Famer, and he spent a good chunk of his career with the Panthers. So, there we go. And then next up is Poliwrath. So Poliwrath, water fighting type, is here for a couple reasons. So, number one, right, the Panthers have this, like, very, this nice blue color. Poliwrath is kind of close to that blue color. It's not precisely right, as, none of the Pokemon I've had that are sort of color references have been precisely the right shade of those colors. But with the Panthers in particular, I really, really tried to find something that was the precise right blue color. Because, apparently, the reason the Panthers picked the blue that they picked, which is called processed blue, is because it was like between the blues that were used by Duke and University of North Carolina, two huge colleges in the state. And the Panthers wanted to pick a blue that was kind of like between those two blues, right? But I really tried, but I wasn't able to find a blue Pokemon that was precisely processed blue. If any of you who are still watching this at this point want to go out there to try and find a Pokemon that is exactly processed blue, the hex code is 0085CA. Good luck, and let me know in the comments if you do find a Pokemon that's processed blue. But anyway, Poliwrath's blue is kind of close-ish. But the other reason I put Poliwrath here is Poliwrath makes a good addition to the team because, it's a fighting type Pokemon, it does a lot of punching, it does a lot of pounding, and one of the Panthers' slogans, one of their team slogans is "Keep Pounding," which honors Sam Mills, who was a former player. He did play for the Panthers, though he didn't spend a ton of his playing career with the Panthers. More importantly, he was a member of the Panthers coaching staff. And Sam Mills said the phrase "keep pounding" in a speech to the team. He then tragically passed away from cancer in 2005, and so the team has sort of taken "keep pounding" as a slogan to, memorialize Sam Mills. And so "keep pounding" felt like it was a good connection with Poliwrath. Next up is Hisuian Braviary. Psychic and flying type, Hisuian Braviary is, of course, an Eagle Pokemon and is here to represent Cam Newton, former Carolina Panthers quarterback. So, Newton was, of course, a really important part of the Panthers team during their sort of strongest recent years in the mid-2010s. Particularly in their 2015 Super Bowl run, right? They only lost one game and the Super Bowl. During that run, Cam Newton won an NFL MVP that year. I mean, he was a really, really good player, particularly that year. And unfortunately, his career kind of flatlined a little bit. He got a shoulder injury, and his play was just never really the same after that. But in his prime, he was so dynamic, really fun to watch play the game. He was an incredibly great passer. He was also an incredibly good rusher. He actually holds the record for most rushing touchdowns by any quarterback in NFL history. It's 75. So Cam Newton just, really fun quarterback to watch. He made the Panthers really, really popular for that time, particularly again in his 2015 season. But what's the Braviary connection? Why is Braviary here to represent Cam Newton? Well, Cam Newton finished out his college ball career at Auburn University. And at Auburn, he led the team's perfect 2010 season, which they won the national title. They didn't lose a single game. And it included a legendary rivalry game, the Iron Bowl, which is the Auburn-Alabama rivalry football game. So the Iron Bowl that year is known as the comeback because Cam Newton led this massive comeback after they were down by a bunch. Really great, really, really great game. And So Cam Newton, Auburn University. Now Auburn's mascot is Tigers, but they also have a secondary mascot, which is an eagle. They have this chant, War Eagle, and they start home games with a live eagle flyover. Kind of like the Eagles do. They do a live eagle flyover as well sometimes. So Braviary then, sort of I wanted that eagle connection is the Cam Newton connection for the Panthers. And also, Braviary's two standard abilities are Keen Eye and Sheer Force. Keen Eye, being able to spot things very well. That represents Cam Newton's skill as a passer. And Sheer Force, strength, represents Cam Newton's skill as a rusher. There we go. Next up is Palo Sand, Ghost and Ground type. So Palo Sand is here to reference Myrtle Beach in South Carolina. It is, of course, one of the most well-known and popular beach destinations in the United States. And Palo Sand is the Sand Castle Pokemon. Again, both Carolinas are sort of represented by the Panthers. Myrtle Beach is actually near the northern border of South Carolina, so it makes it even closer to North Carolina anyway. So there we go. And then finally, we've got Beedrill. So Beedrill is here as specifically a Charlotte reference. So during the Revolutionary War, General Cornwallis, general of the British troops, described Charlotte, North Carolina as a hornet's nest of rebellion, which earned the city the nickname the Hornet's Nest. That's what Charlotte's basketball team, the Hornets, is referencing, right? They're referencing that nickname. So having Beedrill on the Panthers references Hornet's Nest and, of course, references the Charlotte Hornets. So there we go. That's the Panthers. Moving on to the Falcons. First Pokemon for the Falcons is Talonflame. Talonflame is a fire and flying type. It is a Falcon Pokemon. It's got sort of some black on it. Falcons, they're primarily black most of the time. But Talonflame isn't really red, it's more orangish, but red-ish also works with the Falcons there in that regard. And also, Talonflame is a fire type. Well, during the Civil War, General William Sherman, shout out to General Sherman, burned Atlanta to the ground to bring pain to the Confederacy. And I do love that as well. So the fire typing can reference that too. Next up is Granbull. So Granbull is a fairy type Pokemon. Granbull is a dog, specifically a bull. And maybe some of you see where this is going. So Granbull is here to reference Michael Vick. So Michael Vick infamously was involved with dogfighting. He was drafted by the Falcons. He was their star quarterback. He was their franchise quarterback for 6 seasons. He was incredibly talented, dual threat quarterback. But he did get caught up in this dogfighting scandal in 2007. He actually went to prison over it, and that ended his career with the Falcons. So Granbull dog Pokemon references that. Now, I do want to quickly say, Vic did serve his time, right? He served his time in prison. And he has since sort of turned things around. He does sort of spread awareness about the conditions that led him to fall into dogfighting. He has sort of been an advocate for people from those sort of socioeconomic conditions that lead them to get involved in those sorts of activities. He does a lot of coaching now. He seems to be genuinely remorseful over his involvement in dogfighting. As far as I'm concerned, Michael Vick has earned our forgiveness. But I still felt like dog reference was the way to go here. And also, the Georgia Bulldogs, which is University of Georgia, there you go, got a second reference, second reason why Granbull is here. Next up is Whimsicott. Whimsicott is grass and fairy type. Whimsicott, of course, doubles up on that fairy typing a little bit. So either pretend like it's pre-Gen 6, and so Whimsicott is pure grass and Granbull is normal, or also Fairy type is arguably the best type in the game currently anyway. He doesn't have that many weaknesses, so I really don't think the dual typing sinks the team. Also, Gramble, more physically oriented, Whimsicott, more special oriented. So I'm not that worried about this dual typing on this team. Now, Whimsicott is a cotton Pokemon. To this day, the American South produces a ton of cotton, but of course, infamously, before the Civil War, cotton plantations were all across the South, and including all throughout Georgia. So Whimsicott is here to reference that cotton production. And it makes another little American history reference there. Lycanroc is up next. Lycanroc Midnight form specifically. So I'm so very sorry, Falcons fans, but Lycanroc is here as a 23 reference. Sorry. What's the connection there? This one is, again, another long story, so please bear with me. So, in the Pokemon anime, for a really long time, right, Ash was the main character until just the most recent seasons. So Ash was really the main character. And for most of the show's run, he would get to the Pokemon League tournament, but then he would lose. That was the main trope. Everyone just kind of expected that Ash was going to lose. And sometimes it was very heartbreaking when it happened, particularly in the X and Y anime. Ash finished second, and he only lost because the opponent's Pokemon was getting an illegal power boost. But, anyway, so by the time that the Pokemon Sun and Moon anime came around, everybody just basically kind of accepted the fact that Ash was just never going to win a championship. And so, in the Sun and Moon anime, Ash is in a battle with Gladion in the finals, and everyone assumes, Gladion's going to win because Ash is not allowed to win the Pokemon League. But then, he upset Gladion and won the match and the league championships and surprised everyone. Well, similarly, right, in Super Bowl 51, the Falcons were insanely dominant for a good chunk of the game, for the first half in particular. At one point in the third quarter, Falcons are up 21-3. Everyone expected the Falcons were going to win the game, and instead, the Patriots pulled off a massive comeback against the Falcons, the largest comeback in Super Bowl history, and won the game, much to my and everyone else's disappointment. So, except Patriots fans, of course. So, getting a Pokemon from Gladion's team, who Gladion kind of fumbled the bag and let Ash win, seemed appropriate for the Falcons fumbling the bag in Super Bowl 51. Now, Gladion's ace Pokemon is Silvally. Silvally is, I don't know, it's kind of like a borderline legendary. Some people think it's a legendary, some people don't think it's a legendary, but I didn't really want to, have to deal with figuring out whether or not I consider Silvally a legendary. And anyway, it doesn't matter because Gladion's last Pokemon in that match in the anime was his Lycanroc, which was a midnight form Lycanroc. And also, that lines up well with that sort of, boss, right, to Ash. And also, Lycanroc happens to be a nice, deep, dark red color, which does line up well with the Falcons color scheme. Alright, I know that one, probably a bit of a stretch here, but we're moving on to Alolan Raichu. So Alolan Raichu, electric and psychic type, and he's surfing on his tail. So that makes Alolan Raichu a really great reference to swag surfing. The swag surfing dance is very popular at all sorts of sporting events, but Atlanta sports fans in particular are pretty well known for doing it. And also, the group that wrote the song Swag Surfin' is from Georgia. So there we go. Alolan Raichu for the Falcons. And finally, for the Falcons is Hisuian Samurai, water and dark type. So I wanted something that could reference the Georgia Aquarium in Atlanta. It's the largest aquarium in the United States, one of the largest aquariums in the world. And its marquee species is the whale shark. But there's no whale shark Pokemon. So that's no good. And the whale Pokemon, Wailord, and the shark Pokemon, Sharpedo, were both already in use elsewhere by this point. So, okay, no whale shark. But what about manta rays? Because Georgia Aquarium is home to manta rays. So I considered Mantine, but the problem here is, of course, that Mantine is, for some fucking reason, a flying type. I don't know why it's a flying type, but it is. And that would have doubled up on the flying typing on this team. And I'm already doubling up on the fairy typing on this team. So I didn't want to do like a double up on the Falcons. So what else? Well, the Georgia Aquarium does also have sea otters. The Oshawott line is based on sea otters. Samurai is the final form of the Oshawott line. Base Samurai is already in use with the Bucks, of course, but Hisuian Samurai has a different typing. He's water and dark, and thus is available for use. So there we go. And rounding out the NFC South is the New Orleans Saints. First Pokemon for the New Orleans Saints is Serperior. Serperior is a grass type snake Pokemon. It's sort of inspired by the Fleur-de-Lis. And of course the Saints use the Fleur-de-Lis as their team logo. Serperior's design, therefore, is perfect, right? Great connection there. Next up is Houndstone. Houndstone's a ghost type, and he's got a little gravestone on top of his head. Well, New Orleans is, of course, home to these really elaborate and famous cemeteries, really elaborate funeral rituals. So Houndstone, ghost dog, tombstone Pokemon, really good synergy with New Orleans culture there. Speaking of New Orleans culture, we have Quaquaval. Quaquaval is a water and fighting type, and he's always dancing in Scarlet and Violet when you send him out. So it feels like a really good way to reference Mardi Gras because, you know, Quaquaval is this very flamboyant, very well-decorated Pokemon, and of course that is common with Mardi Gras revelers is sort of flamboyant outfits and dress and dancing and partying and all that stuff. Mardi Gras is, of course, huge in New Orleans, probably the most famous Mardi Gras celebration in the world, or at least in the United States. So Quaquaval seemed like a perfect fit for the team. Next up is Clodsire. This one's probably a little bit of a stretch here, but one of the things that southern Louisiana is known for is the bayou, the sort of massive wetland area around the Mississippi Delta. So Clodsire is this very swampy Pokemon. It calls to mind it's poison ground type. It calls to mind kind of swamp creatures, calls to mind gigantic catfish. Swamp creatures like swamp cryptids are sort of frequently associated with the bayou, and gigantic catfish like actually for real live in the bayou, so Clodsire is a reference to both those things. Next up is Hisuian Goodra, Steel and Dragon type. So New Orleans has been heavily influenced by France and by French culture. You know, they've got the French Quarter there, right? So I wanted to make sure that there was a Kalos Pokemon on the team to represent that French connection. Kalos is the region based off of France. And the French eat snails, and Hisuian Goodra is a snail Pokemon. So it felt like a good French reference. There you go. And finally, we have Zoroark. Zoroark's a dark type Pokemon, and Zoroark is here as a reference to legendary Saints quarterback Drew Brees. So Brees holds a number of passing-related records in the NFL, and of course in the Saints. The Brees also led the Saints to their one and only Super Bowl victory, and the reason why Zoroark is a reference to Brees is because Zoroark is Pokemon number 571. Brees had 571 career touchdowns, so that is the reference there. Moving on to our final division in this long-ass video, we have the NFC West, and we're starting with the Los Angeles Rams. So Los Angeles Rams first up is Go-Goat. Go-Goat is, of course, Goat Pokemon, so it's very Ram-like. So there we go. Makes sense. Next up is Machamp. Machamp is a bodybuilder Pokemon, right? The most famous bodybuilder of all time is arguably Arnold Schwarzenegger. Arnold's fame was very much amplified by his career in Hollywood, which is of course in Los Angeles. Also, Arnold would go on to be governor of California. So good California reference, good bodybuilder reference, good Hollywood reference. There's a lot of good synergy here with Machamp. Next up is Gothitelle. Gothitelle is a psychic type Pokemon. LA has a very large and very well-known goth scene. Gothitelle is the goth Pokemon. So I felt compelled to add Gothitelle to one of the LA teams. And by the time I was trying to add Gothitelle to something, I'd already given the Chargers the psychic type in Behia. So Gothitelle found its way to the Rams. Next up is Lopunny. Lopunny is a normal type. And I do remember, like, a little bit of, I don't know, controversy, I guess, for lack of a better term, about Lopunny when it first came out, because of Lopunny's, like, resemblance to the Playboy Bunny. And I mean, you know, look at Lopunny. Game Freak, do you really expect me to believe that it's just an accident? I don't think so. So anyway, Lopunny looks kind of like a Playboy Bunny. Looks like the Playboy Bunny logo, right? And Playboy Mansion is in LA. So there we go. That's the LA reference. Next is Florges. Specifically, Florges' red flower form. Florges is a fairy type Pokemon. And Florges is here as a reference to the Rose Bowl. So the Rose Bowl is a really famous college football bowl game. It's traditionally been held at Rose Bowl Stadium in Pasadena, which is in LA County, right? And Rose Bowl Stadium has hosted several Super Bowls in addition to being the home to this really famous college bowl game, including, by the way, Super Bowl 14 in 1980, which the Rams played in. They did lose, but they did play in it, which is a good connection there. And that Super Bowl, Super Bowl 14, 1980, was attended by over 103,000 people, which is a postseason attendance record in the NFL. So, felt like a good homage to that by including Florges here, because Florges gathers and cares for flowers, and the red flower Florges in particular looks like Florges gathering and caring for red roses. So there we go. You've got the Rose Bowl reference. And also, bonus, Pasadena holds the annual Rose Parade, which is, of course, why it's Rose Bowl Stadium, Rose Bowl game, all that. But anyway, you got the annual Rose Parade in Pasadena, and it has tons of floats, which are decorated with these rose displays. Florges, who's gathering all these roses, would be a real pro at making and decorating one of those floats. And then finally, we have Dugong, water and ice type. Dugong's here because California's coast, which including LA, right, is really famous for a high number of sea lions. Dugong is technically named after a different real-life animal called dugong, but it does also, resemble a sea lion. And so Dugong felt like a good reference to a sea lion. Now, another sea lion Pokemon is Primarina, but that doubled up on the fairy typing, which is why I put Dugong on the Rams instead of Primarina. And I used Primarina on the Niners instead, which are our next team. So, moving on to the San Francisco 49ers, first Pokemon is obviously Goldengo. Goldengo is a Steel and Ghost type Pokemon. It is literally made of gold. The Niners are named after the 1849 California Gold Rush. So, Goldengo had to go here. But, as I just mentioned, Primarina is also on the 49ers. So Primarina is a sea lion-based Pokemon. San Francisco famously has these large sea lion colonies living there. So, there you go. Primarina, water fairy type. Next up is Komala, normal type Pokemon. Another interesting thing about the San Francisco Bay Area is that it's home to a large number of eucalyptus trees, which are actually an invasive species, very, very bad. But yes, lots of eucalyptus trees in the San Francisco area. Now, how does Komala connect to that? Well, Komala is the koala Pokemon. Koalas eat eucalyptus. Infamously, don't get enough nutrients from eucalyptus, but that's what they eat anyway. So there you go. That's Komala and eucalyptus to San Francisco. Next up is Archaludon, Steel and Dragon type. Sorry again about the double steel typing here. But I will say Archaludon and Goldengo only share one single weakness, so I don't think it's a big deal. But Archaludon is looks like a bridge, basically. And what bridge is more famous than San Francisco's Golden Gate Bridge? So Archaludon thus is here. Next up is Mightyena. Mightyena is a dark type Pokemon. Mightyena is here to reference Brock Purdy. So Brock Purdy is the 49ers quarterback, and he has faced a lot of talk about being Mr. Irrelevant. I'd be lying if I said he was sort of, and I don't consider him an elite quarterback, you know what I mean? But he's obviously been an important piece for the 49ers team. That said, right, Brock Purdy was the very last pick in the 2022 draft. Specifically, he was drafted at number 262. And Mightyena is Pokemon number 262. Mightyena, as an early route Pokemon, involves Poochyena. You can catch Poochyena on the first route in the Hoenn games. So Mightyena as an early route Pokemon is, most people don't really think of Mightyena as really a full playthrough worthy team, but on the right team, in the right system, shall we say, Mightyena can be valuable, just like Brock Purdy. And finally, Pokemon number 6 for the Niners is Venomoth. Venomoth is a bug and poison type, and Venomoth is literally Pokemon number 49. So, 49ers. Seattle Seahawks. First up is Cramorant. Cramorant is a water and flying type, and it's kind of the closest I could get to a Seahawk Pokemon. Plus, it's got green eyes, just like the Seahawk logo has green eyes. So there you go. Next up is Exploud. Exploud is a normal type Pokemon, and this Pokemon's whole thing is being loud. Well, Seattle Stadium is famously extremely loud. It gives the Seahawks this really great home team advantage. So that's great, but then also it works as reference to Seattle's famous Legion of Boom defensive secondary unit from the 2010s. Again, boom, noise, sound, Exploud, all works. And also just a couple more little fun little connections and references. Nirvana, of course, extremely iconic punk band, hails from Washington, sound, Pokemon, Exploud. And especially Loudred has sort of speakers at the top of its head, so kind of works there. And also, one of the major waterways in Washington, in the state, is Puget Sound. Exploud, sound, it's all sort of in there in the mix. But the main things are the noise of the fans and the Legion of Boom for Exploud. Next up is Flygon. Flygon's a ground and dragon type. And Flygon's here because the state insect of Washington is the green darner dragonfly. And actually, Washington is one of only 2 states with a dragonfly as its state insect. The other is Alaska. Alaska doesn't have an NFL team. Flygon is a dragonfly, right? It's a dragonfly Pokemon. So there we go. And also, one of the Seahawks' alternate uniforms is primarily a green color. It's different green than Flygon, but, still good enough. Next up is Sigilif, psychic and flying type. Again, flying type overlaps. Don't really think it sinks the team here. But Sigilif is here to represent the Native American heritage of the region. sort of archaeologically, it's thought that people have been living in the Seattle area for like 4,000 years, so, really long time. Like Volcarona on the Chiefs, Sigilif, not really based on a Native American nation that actually lived in the Seattle area, but our options for references to Native Americans in Pokemon are pretty limited. But aside from the fact that there was just a large, not a large, but like a long, is the word I'm actually looking for. Aside from the fact that there's a long history of Native settlement in the Seattle region, it's also the fact that Seattle comes from the name of an important local chieftain. The chieftain's name was Seattle. That's what the city's named after, is this chieftain from the 19th century. So it felt appropriate to draw that connection. Next up is Alcremie. Alcremie is a fairy-type Pokemon, and Alcremie is the cream Pokemon. Alcremie and its pre-evolution Milcery are sort of these like cafe-themed Pokemon. And what's the most famous cafe chain in the world? I mean, Starbucks, right? Well, Starbucks was started in and is based out of Seattle. They also use a lot of whipped cream in their drinks, so it makes Alcremie the perfect representation for Starbucks. And especially just because Starbucks uses a bunch of different flavors of creams, and so Alcremie has different forms depending on what Milcery is sort of mixed with when it evolves. So I don't know, it just feels like a really good connection there. And then finally wrapping up the Seahawks is Ampharos. Ampharos, electric type Pokemon, it's the lighthouse Pokemon, and has demonstrated in the Generation 2 games, right? It's at the top of the Olivine Lighthouse. Now, as with any place that's near the sea, Seattle has a lighthouse. It's got a particularly famous lighthouse called West Point Light, and it's actually the central feature of its Discovery Park. Discovery Park is actually the largest public park in the city of Seattle. The lighthouse is this really important part of Discovery Park. Ampharos Lighthouse Pokemon, there we go. And finally, the last team we have to give Pokemon to is the Arizona Cardinals. So, first Pokemon up is Bailey-style Oricorio, fire and flying type. There's no Cardinal Pokemon yet, which does seem kind of crazy to me, but this form of Oricorio works pretty well as a Cardinal stand-in. It's also the right coloration, basically. Next up is Maractus. Maractus is a cactus Pokemon. Arizona has a ton of cactuses, or cacti, so that's a good match for that. Next up is Drapion. Drapion is a scorpion Pokemon. Now, scorpions can be found in many states, but they're most numerous in desert climates, such as, Arizona. Next up is Orbeetle. So Orbeetle, bug and psychic type, and it is another it's sort of based off of aliens and flying saucers. So again, kind of lines up with the Southwest having alien and flying saucer like sightings in pretty high numbers. Rumors about that in pretty high numbers, but also one of the largest and most well-developed astronomical observatories in the Northern Hemisphere is the Pitt Peak National Observatory in Arizona. They look up at the stars, look up at the night sky, right? And so that, again, that sort of connection with space works well there too. And also, Orbeetle evolves from a Pokemon called Doppler. Well, Doppler is partially named after the Doppler radar, which is used in astronomy. Next up is Heliolisk. Heliolisk is an electric and normal type Pokemon. And Heliolisk is a good fit for the team because Arizona is home to a great number and variety of lizards, particularly the Gila monster, but there's no Gila monster Pokemon. But Heliolisk is caught in the desert in Pokemon X and Y, where it first appears. So it is a desert Pokemon. Its abilities are... One of its abilities, rather, is Sand Veil, which boosts its evasion, and is Sandstorm, so, desert-themed, right? Makes sense. but also Heliolisk has a hidden ability called Solar Power, which boosts its special attack in the sun, which is very appropriate for a state like Arizona, which gets a lot of sunlight. Arizona is also home to solar power, to a lot of solar power development, so Heliolisk felt like a good representation of those aspects as well. And finally is Excadrill. So Arizona has had a really long history of mining, particularly a long history of copper mining, and that makes Excadrill the perfect assistant to such a mining operation. And its steel typing actually works well as a reference to the copper, because in Pokemon, steel typing basically just means metal. And, like I said, Arizona does a lot of copper mining. So there we go, Excadrill. And with that, we have finally gone through Team of 6 Pokemon for all 32 NFL teams. 192 Pokemon, some more of a stretch than the others. So if you've watched this whole thing, thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed. If you skipped around and just looked at your team or your teams, hope you enjoyed the lineup I gave your teams. Let me know in the comments what Pokemon you really liked, what Pokemon you thought were too much of a stretch. Let me know what you would have done differently down in the comments below. And yeah, this is a brand new channel. I've got some ideas for a couple other future sort of nerdy videos in the future, so if you're interested in seeing that, go ahead and subscribe to the channel and follow along to see what's next. Probably gonna have a May the 4th Star Wars video, so keep an eye out for that. And otherwise, thank you for watching. Enjoy the draft, and see you next time.